Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere rough, rugged, and let's be honest, downright disgusting. The American frontier. That stretch of lawless land where the myth of freedom and exploration met the very real aroma of unwashed bodies, bad food, and hygiene practices that would make a raccoon gamzak. If you're imagining wide open skies, tumbleweeds, and valiant cowboys, well sure, but more importantly, imagine relentless body odour, fleas in your pants, and the constant fear of stepping in something truly regrettable. You probably won't survive this, but if you do, it's going to be because you mastered the subtle art of not breathing through your nose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's not everyone's cup of weak, overboiled frontier tea, but if you're into slow, weird history for sleep, you're in the right sod-roofed shack. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I always wonder who's out there snuggling into this mess of dusty American drama from their cozy 21st century beds. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the edge of the American frontier in the early 1800s, and the first thing that hits you is the wind. Not the romantic prairie breeze, no, this wind smells like horses, wet leather, wood smoke, and something dead. You glance around and realise it's just Tuesday. Your boots sink slightly into a mixture of mud, manure and ash. There's no pavement here, just whatever the elements left behind. As you walk into the nearest settlement, a loose cluster of cabins, maybe a saloon, and something that might once have been a church, you're not struck by the promise of new beginnings. You're struck by how much everything reeks. Even the wood smells tired. People shuffle by in dust-covered clothes that might have been white once. Everyone has a layer of grime, faces are sunburned, wind-chapped, and streaked with soot, and no one seems bothered. This is just how things are. You're the weird one for flinching. You approach what looks like a general store, or maybe it's someone's kitchen, and lean on a fence that leaves splinters in your elbow. A man nods at you, chewing something dark and mysterious. "You knew?" he asks, and when you nod, he grins, revealing exactly 3 teeth. You try not to stare. So, let's talk about what you've gotten yourself into. The American frontier in its heyday was a land of opportunity, sure, but also one of deep, unrelenting discomfort. You've got harsh weather, limited food, and no infrastructure. That means everything smells like smoke, sweat, or something decaying nearby. And let's not forget the animals. Cattle, chickens, pigs, goats, all living close, often inside your home. You'll be familiar with their scent. Intimately. But hey, people are resilient. You start to notice little acts of survival. A woman washing her hands with ashes and cold water, a boy scraping boots with a dull knife, a teenager sewing a ripped sleeve with thread made from horsehair. There's a rhythm here. A grimy, persistent rhythm. As you wander farther into town, you pass a one-room schoolhouse. Through a dusty window, you spot a group of children learning their letters from a slate board, while one kid picks at a suspicious rash on his neck. Behind the schoolhouse, an outhouse leans ominously to one side. You make a mental note never to use it. And you're not alone in your discomfort. Early frontier writings mention the constant dirt, the fleas, the howling wind, and the challenge of ever feeling truly clean. Letters home often begin with "still alive," which is encouraging if not wildly optimistic. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some frontier families, in desperate attempts to freshen up their homes, would hang skunks outside the cabin, believing the strong odour would ward off illness. Yes, skunks, on purpose. And then there's the scholarly debate about how miserable these people really were. Some historians argue the hardship-bonded communities forged resilience and built the American spirit. Others say, yeah, or maybe they were just too exhausted to complain. Who knows? What's clear is that if you survived your first year, you were doing pretty well. Not clean, but alive. As night falls, you realise there's no escape from the filth. There's no bathhouse, no running water, no laundry machines. Your clothes already smell like smoke and sweat, and you've only been here a day. You lay down in a loft above a barn, sharing space with hay, a few mice, and the unsettling sound of something chewing in the dark. Could be a rat, could be a possum. You're too tired to care. And oddly, it's peaceful. Stars stretch across the sky like spilled salt. Crickets hum a low, scratchy tune. You finally exhale, realising this land is more than just hardship. It's survival, it's raw, it's real. And it's going to get way, way worse before it gets better. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it seeps in through the cracks in the barn walls. A sliver of grey light cuts across your face and something damp is touching your boot. You glance down. It's a chicken, just staring, judging. You're on the American frontier now, and privacy, like soap, is mostly theoretical. You creak your way down the loft ladder, stepping carefully around mouse droppings and a boot someone vomited in. Outside, the day begins with the sounds of metal on metal, someone sharpening a blade, and the cough of a man who's been smoking unfiltered leaf tobacco since childhood. Breakfast smells drift your way, burnt beans and questionable pork fat sizzling over a fire. It's not good, but it's warm, and that's something. Now, let's talk toilets, or more accurately, the tragic absence of them. Indoor plumbing on the frontier? That's a fantasy, a decadent Eastern indulgence. Here, when nature calls, you grab your boots, a lantern if it is dark, and trudge your way to the outhouse, if your homestead has one. If not, it's find a cold bush and hope the wind's not against you. You open the outhouse door, and the smell hits you like a wall. The pit below has been fermenting for months. Flies buzz so thick you think the air's moving. The wood is damp with something. You don't ask questions, you just hover and pray your balance holds. Splinters in sensitive places are not the way you want to start the day. What's worse is that these outhouses weren't always far from where people cooked or slept. A lot of folks didn't build them far enough away from water sources either. So guess what ends up in the drinking bucket sometimes? Yep, let's move on before your gag reflex kicks in. Now, if you're lucky, your family uses a chamber pot at night. A lovely little ceramic or tin bowl you keep under the bed to pee in, so you don't have to walk outside in a snowstorm. In the morning, someone's job, probably yours if you're the youngest, is to take it out and dump it. Most folks do this behind the house. Some just toss it out the back door and yell, "Watch out!" like that helps. And then there's the honey bucket. Sounds cute, right? It's not. It's a bucket, often shared, used for bodily waste in homes that don't have an outhouse. Once it fills up, someone has to carry it away, sloshing and all. Slipping while holding the honey bucket is considered a frontier horror story. And yes, it happened more than once. For wiping, toilet paper isn't a thing yet. Corn cobs, leaves, or scraps of cloth are your options. Corn cobs were weirdly popular, not soft but reusable if you're brave and short on shame. Some households kept a family cloth, which is exactly what it sounds like. One cloth, multiple people, washed occasionally. Best not to think about it too long. Historical accounts often gloss over these little details. We read about brave pioneers and the march westward, but nobody mentions the sheer amount of time people spent thinking about, talking about, or dealing with human waste. Sanitation wasn't just a personal inconvenience, it was a survival issue. Contaminated water killed more people than rattlesnakes or bandits. Here's a fringe fact that may haunt you. In some towns, the streets were so full of manure from horses and mules that newspapers ran editorials begging people to shovel their share or risk drowning in dung during heavy rains. Drowning. In manure. This is your glamorous frontier life. And scholars still debate how much these unsanitary conditions contributed to the outbreaks of disease that swept through settlements. Was it poor hygiene alone, or did environmental factors play a bigger role? Some argue that people were more resistant to disease due to constant exposure. Others say no. Most folks were just constantly sick and called it toughness. By mid-morning, you've accepted that your boots will never be clean again. You've stepped in something, maybe from a cow, maybe from a neighbour, and wiped it off in tall grass, which unfortunately was hiding more of the same. It's fine. You stop caring. That's part of the journey. As you walk through the settlement, you spot a man casually relieving himself against the side of a barn. No one bats an eye. A kid squats in the alley between two shacks. Again, normal. This is just how it's done. There's no shame because there's no alternative. By noon, the sun has baked the waste-soaked ground into a crusty, crunchy surface that releases puffs of odour with every step. Flies swarm freely, and the town's one dog is busy digging through a pile of what you hope is old stew. The saloon, which opens at midday, smells better than most places, not because it's clean, but because whiskey kills the nose first. And yet you notice something unexpected. People still laugh here. They play music, tell stories, dance awkwardly on weekends. They build community in the middle of the mess. The filth is overwhelming, sure, but it's also universal. Everyone's gross together, and somehow that makes it bearable. You lean against a barrel that may or may not contain pickles. It's unclear. and watch as a mother hauls a pail of wastewater down the road to toss it into the communal ditch. She smiles at you, brushes a strand of hair off her sweat-dappled forehead and says, "Ain't it a lovely day?" And you nod, because weirdly, it kind of is. You smell like smoke, not as sat in the cosy campfire on a sweater kind of way, but in the you've been sleeping inside a chimney kind of way. Your clothes are saturated with the scent, sharp, greasy and a little acidic. You've been on the American frontier for all of 2 days now, and already your body has fully surrendered to the lifestyle of minimal bathing, maximum odour, and the gentle embrace of airborne ash. The frontier doesn't believe in showers. It barely believes in water that isn't frozen, muddy, or being used to soak beans. Most families bathe maybe once a week, once a month in winter, and when they do, it's usually all in the same tub of water, oldest to youngest. If you're last in line, you're basically just marinating in everyone else's filth. Congratulations, you're the final flavour note in this human stew. Soap, when it exists, is homemade, crafted from animal fat and lye, with a consistency somewhere between candle wax and regret. It burns a little, it stinks a lot, and it's not exactly luxurious. There are no loofahs, no eucalyptus-infused anything, just a rag, some cold water, and a moment of deep existential reflection. You find yourself near a creek that might serve as the town's unofficial bathhouse. It's shallow, slow-moving, and probably full of bacteria. Still, you see someone crouched over a rock splashing water onto their face. A little boy jumps in, chasing minnows, while a woman wrings out a pair of socks that have clearly seen some things. You kneel down to wash your hands, but the second your skin touches the icy water, your fingers go numb. Bathing here is an act of bravery, or desperation. People mask their scent with whatever's on hand, wood smoke, animal fat, strong spices. Some women press lavender or rosemary into their clothing, but that's only if they're lucky enough to grow herbs. Men might rub their hands with pine resin or chew on mint leaves, but it's like trying to Febreze a dumpster. It masks nothing. You still reek. Historical journals tell us that travellers could often smell a homestead before they saw it. The aroma of old meat, sweat-drenched fabric, manure and smoke clung to every surface. And because people lived close to their livestock, homes often smelled like barns, and not in a nostalgic candle scent way. Here's a delightful fringe fact. Some frontiersmen believed too much bathing could weaken you. Wash too often, and your body might absorb bad air, or lose its natural defences, so they avoided it on purpose, proudly announcing that their stink was a sign of health and masculinity. So yes, the stink was not just tolerated, it was weaponized. You visit a neighbour's cabin, lured by the smell of something cooking that isn't burnt beans. Inside, it's warm and dark, a pot simmers over the fire and steam fogs up the tiny window. The walls are coated in soot, the ceiling drips with tar-like residue from years of indoor fires, and there's a thin film of grease on everything, from the plates to the baby. The man of the house waves you in, laughing at some joke you missed. You politely take a seat and immediately notice the chair is sticky. You choose not to investigate. The family dog lies under the table, chewing a bone that may or may not be from an animal. Or human. Hard to tell, honestly. Dinner is served, some sort of stew with floating bits of root vegetable and something chewy. You pretend not to notice the fly that lands in your bowl, does a quick lap and leaves. When you raise the spoon to your lips, the smell of smoke overwhelms everything. Every bite tastes like pine and metal. Even the bread, if you can call it that, is gritty with flour ground by hand in someone's barn. You thank your host, compliment the stew, and step outside to breathe. Not fresh air, just different air. Slightly less smoky. You brush your coat, but the soot just smears. Everything is coated in a fine black dust. Your hands look like you've been finger painting with coal. Your hair feels like old rope. You've lost track of how many days it's been since you were actually clean, and at this point, does it even matter? Scholars still debate how much attention frontier folks paid to hygiene. Some argue that standards were surprisingly high. Daily face washing, clean linens when possible, efforts to keep insects at bay. Others insist that filth was simply a fact of life, and that we romanticize their cleanliness because we can't fathom how dirty life really was. Truth is probably somewhere in between. People did what they could with what they had, and what they had wasn't much. As night rolls in, smoke settles over the town like a wool blanket. Every cabin, every fire, every chimney sends up a signal. You sit by a fire with some new acquaintances, one of whom casually picks a louse from his collar and flicks it into the flames. No one reacts. You warm your hands, cough a little, and try not to think about what's crawling in your clothes. The stars come out again, sharp and cold in the clear sky. You lean back, your back stiff from hard labour and bad posture, and let yourself zone out to the crackle of fire and the low hum of a fiddle drifting from somewhere nearby. And just like that, another day of filth and survival passes on the American frontier. You're dirty, you're smelly, but somehow you're okay. Little soot in your soup never killed anybody, except for the ones it definitely did. You wake up scratching. Not an idle morning stretch kind of scratch. This is aggressive, primal, 2 hands and a stick kind of scratching. Your scalp is crawling, your wrists itch. There's something in your shirt that should absolutely not be in there. Congratulations, Pioneer. You now have roommates, and they are very, very small. The frontier is a paradise for parasites. Lice, fleas, ticks, mites. If it can bite and cling, it's already on you. You may not have a house, a proper bed or clean socks, but you are hosting the wildest insect party west of the Mississippi, and they do not leave when you ask nicely. You stumble out of bed, straw mat, and drag your blanket outside, flapping it over a fence in the vain hope that sunlight will do something. It won't. The lice are too comfortable, nestled into the seams of your clothes, breeding like it's their manifest destiny. And the fleas? They're having a little bounce-a-thon in your boots. You meet a woman hauling a basket of laundry toward the creek and ask her, very casually, is it normal to feel like bugs are crawling inside your brain? She nods sympathetically and tells you to try boiling your underthings, assuming you own a pot large enough and you're willing to sacrifice your only pair of drawers to the cause. Here's the thing, on the frontier, lice are executor. They're not even that embarrassing. Everyone has them. Kids are born with them. If you find someone who's lice-free, they probably just moved from the city, and even then, give it a week. To combat the onslaught, people try everything. Washing in lice soap, dousing their heads with vinegar, combing through hair with fine-toothed bones. Some desperate souls shave everything off and just wear a scarf until it grows back. Others rub kerosene or bear grease into their scalps. It works, sort of, but leaves you smelling like a lantern that's been punched in the face. And then there are the superstitions. Some believe tying a blue string around your neck wards off lice. Others carry a dried beetle in their pocket. There's one theory that eating lots of onions makes your blood taste bad to bugs. You eat 3 raw onions that day and still itch through the night. Either it's nonsense or these bugs have developed a taste for frontier cuisine. Inside the saloon, you spot a man scratching at his armpit with a spoon. No one reacts. You find yourself scratching in sympathy, like your nervous system has synced with the whole town. You share a bench with a trapper who smells like he lost a fight with a wet raccoon. He confesses he hasn't changed his shirt in over a month. Too stiff to fold now, he jokes, raising his mug. You glance at his collar. Yes, it's moving. Historical records back this up. Frontier folk dealt with infestations constantly. Soldiers during the Civil War even had a name for body lice: greybacks. Entire camps would set aside time for delousing, which involved holding clothes over fire to roast the bugs alive. Just imagine the smell of burning cotton, sweat and fried lice wafting through your bedroom. Sweet dreams, fringe fact. Some homes kept chickens indoors, not just for eggs, but because chickens would eat bedbugs and fleas. That's right. Poultry as pest control. You could sleep a little easier knowing a half-asleep hen might peck a bug off your blanket while you dream of cleaner days. Nature is beautiful and mildly horrifying. Now, there's the scholarly debate. Were frontier folks just immune to the horror of bugs, or did they truly hate it and suffer quietly? Some researchers say they were toughened by constant exposure, they itched and moved on. Others argue that writings from the period suggest very real discomfort, even trauma. The truth is probably both. You get used to it, but you never really like it. No one enjoys pulling a tick out of their armpit before breakfast. Back in your own cabin, you strip down and inspect yourself by candlelight. A line of tiny red bites traces your ribs. You find 2 ticks, one still crawling, one latched on, and flick them into the fire. You scratch at a scab until it bleeds, then shrug and pull your filthy shirt back over your head. There's no point trying to stay clean when everything you touch is infested. You remember reading once that a full-grown female body louse can lay up to 6 eggs a day. Multiply that by a couple dozen. You stop yourself. Better not to do the math. It's easier to cope when you pretend your shirt isn't a living ecosystem. Someone hands you a small pouch of tobacco and tells you to rub it into your socks to keep the fleas away. You try it, and now your ankles reek like a failed campfire. But hey, maybe it works. Maybe the fleas just laugh and move to your waistband. You're starting to suspect they have strategy meetings. By nightfall, you've accepted the scratching. It's background noise now. Your nails are blunt from clawing at bites. You nestle into your itchy bed and wrap yourself in your flea-lined blanket like a human burrito of suffering. Somewhere in the corner, a mouse sneezes. As your eyes close, you dream of hot baths, fresh linens, and the sweet, sweet silence of a night without scratching. But out here, on the raw edge of survival, bugs are just part of the deal. You don't defeat them, you coexist, barely. By the time breakfast rolls around, you're already starving. Not a cute brunch time kind of hungry. This is deep animal hunger that makes tree bark look a little tempting. Your stomach has been growling since the middle of the night, loud enough to compete with the wolves in the hills, and now it's time to see what frontier dining really means. Spoiler, it's not good. You shuffle over to the campfire, where someone's already cooking something in a dented iron pot. A thick greyish steam rises from it, carrying a scent you can't quite identify. Could be beans, could be stew, could be disappointment. A woman stirs it slowly with a stick that might double as a poker, a spoon, and a weapon. "Hope you like it bland," she says, smiling through chapped lips. "Salt ran out last week." So what's on the frontier menu? Mostly beans, hardtack, cornbread, dried apples if you're lucky, and salt pork that's more salt than pork. The beans are boiled until they resemble paste, the hardtack is like gnawing on a brick, and the cornbread is dry enough to absorb your hopes and dreams. Butter, forget it. Sugar? If someone dies and leaves you some in their will. Meat is a gamble. If it's fresh, it might still be gamey, chewy, and full of mystery bits. If it's not fresh, well, let's just say spice was often used to cover up spoilage rather than flavour. You learn quickly that jerky is a staple because it doesn't rot, at least not for a while, and even if it does, you're too hungry to care. Day's breakfast turns out to be a medley of blackened beans, a flap of boiled fat and coffee. And we need to talk about the coffee. It is not good. It is water, vaguely flavoured with ground beans that were roasted in someone's frying pan, left too long and possibly shared with ants. It's bitter, gritty, and strong enough to wake the dead, or dissolve a spoon. Some folks stretch their coffee by adding roasted corn, dandelion root, or even ground up acorns. It gives the drink an earthy flavour, by which we mean tastes like a burned log. Still, it's hot, and that counts for something. You wrap your fingers around the tin mug and sip, pretending you don't notice the floating crumb of something unidentifiable drifting on the surface. Later, you help gather what passes for ingredients. You scavenge wild onions, dig up some stubborn tubers, and find a patch of sorrel growing near the outhouse. You try not to think about that too much. The nearest town is several days away by wagon, and supply shipments are rare. When you run out of food, you either hunt or starve. Now, you're not a skilled hunter. The closest you've come to tracking game is watching squirrels from the porch. But you tag along with a group heading out to find something. Anything with legs and protein. They carry old rifles, traps and knives that haven't been sharpened since last spring. You're not picky. If it walks, it's probably dinner. After several hours of squinting at tracks and stepping in puddles, someone shoots a rabbit. Everyone cheers like it's Christmas. The animal is skinned, gutted, and roasted over a fire before the sun sets. You get a piece about the size of your thumb. It tastes like victory, dirt, and hair. You chew it slowly, savouring every gritty, smoky bite. Fringe frontier cuisine? Some settlers resorted to eating boiled leather. Yes, their own shoes, during especially lean times. Leather boiled long enough softens just enough to chew, and though it provides no real nutrition, it at least gives your stomach something to work on. It's like eating sadness, yes, but tougher. There's also pemmican, a mix of dried meat, animal fat and berries mashed into a dense brick. Originally made by the native peoples, settlers adopted it for its long shelf life. It's greasy, oddly sweet, and basically the protein bar of the 19th century. One bite fills your mouth with a flavour that can only be described as beef candle. Now, historians argue about whether frontier folk were truly starving most of the time or just extremely resourceful. Some letters and journals mention seasons of plenty, fresh game, foraged berries, fish from streams. Others paint a bleaker picture, whole winters on dried beans and bark tea. It probably depended on where you lived, what you knew, and how much luck you had. You sit by the fire again that night, clutching a bowl of something that might be porridge or just hot water with attitude. Your teeth ache from chewing hardtack earlier. It cracked a molar and now there's a constant throb in your jaw. Someone offers you a clove to bite on, you accept it gratefully, pressing it between your teeth and pretending it helps, and then someone pulls out a fiddle. Music rises from the misery, soft, clumsy notes floating into the air. A few people hum along, one woman starts clapping, and the rhythm picks up. Oi. You smile for the first time today, because even though dinner was a beige nightmare and your stomach is still half empty, there's something comforting about sharing the struggle. Everyone's hungry, everyone's tired, and everyone is just doing their best to make it through another day. As you lie down later, under a sky thick with stars and wood smoke, your stomach grumbles softly. You're not full, you're never really full, but you're still here. And that, in this gritty, smoky, bean-fueled world, counts as success. By now, your clothes are less of a wardrobe and more of a slow-moving biohazard. You're not even sure what colour your shirt used to be. The knees of your trousers are permanently crusted with something dry and suspicious, and your socks, well, one of them ran off during the night. Probably gave up. It's okay. You didn't like it anyway. Welcome to Frontier Fashion, where form meets function, and both lose to filth. Your daily outfit is chosen based on two questions. Will it keep out the cold, and can it survive being peed on by a goat? Because it probably will be. You've already stopped caring about style. There's no one here to impress. Everyone's wearing various idioms on the same grimy theme. Heavy cotton, wool, maybe deerskin if someone got lucky in the woods. It's stiff, it's scratchy, and after about a week of wear it smells like smoked regret. Underwear is rare. The working poor often went without it altogether. If you were lucky enough to own a union suit, that charming full-body button-up onesie, you wore it for weeks, sometimes months, without washing. And no, it doesn't breathe well. You sweat into it during the day, freeze in it at night, and by the third week, it's basically an additional organ. Washing clothes is a full-day event. First, you have to heat the water, usually by chopping firewood and boiling it over an open flame. Then you scrub each piece by hand using lye soap, ashes, or if you're fancy, store-bought powder. The scrubbing happens on a washboard or a flat rock. Either way, your knuckles will bleed by lunch. And drying, that's a gamble. If the weather's good, you hang everything outside and pray it doesn't blow away or get pooped on by birds. If the weather's bad, you hang it inside, where it drips onto your bed or your soup pot, depending on the setup. Today is laundry day, and you've been volunteered. You lug a basket of stiff, sour-smelling clothes to the creek. There's already a woman there beating a shirt against a rock like it owes her money. She nods at you, her sleeves rolled up, her face expressionless. You start scrubbing, and within 10 minutes your hands are raw and your back is already staging a protest. After an hour, you realise something shocking. The shirt you've been scrubbing for 20 minutes is actually someone's pants. You flip it over, find a crusted button, and sigh. Everything out here is so soaked in smoke and sweat that it's hard to tell fabric from flesh. A girl nearby points out that if you really want to get the lice eggs out, you have to boil the clothes. She gestures to a giant pot balanced precariously over a fire. Inside, socks and shirts swirl like pasta. The steam smells like mildew and wet dog, and the smoke stings your eyes. This, apparently, is cleanliness. Fringe, fact time. Some pioneers didn't wash their clothes at all, they just buried them, for a week or two. Supposedly, the earth would absorb the oils and kill the lice. It's unclear if this worked, but hey, when your options are boil it or bury it, you start to understand why people smelled like compost. The real challenge is outerwear. Wool coats and buffalo hides are thick and warm, but impossible to wash properly. They absorb every odour, every drop of sweat, every sneeze. One man brags about wearing the same coat for 7 years. When someone asks how it still fits, he shrugs and says, "It grew with me." You're not sure whether to laugh or report it to science. Historians debate just how bad frontier clothing really was. Some say folks were meticulous when they could be, mending regularly, darning socks, even ironing with heavy pans heated on stoves. Others argue that survival always beat style, and as long as it covered the essentials and didn't disintegrate, it was considered clean enough. The truth lies somewhere in the muddy middle. What's clear is that clothing had to be durable. Dresses were made of calico or muslin and layered for warmth. Petticoats, underskirts, aprons. Women's garments weighed a ton, especially in winter, and don't even ask about corsets. If you were working a farm in one of those, you were either a masochist or had truly terrifying posture. Shoes? Ha! Footwear was a disaster. Leather boots took forever to break in, and once they did, they immediately started falling apart. Many people wore the same pair until they were held together by twine and determination. Blisters, frostbite, and trench foot, yes, even on land, were common, and when a shoe finally gave out, it was often passed down to a younger sibling with smaller feet and lower expectations. By evening, your clothes are technically cleaner, but they still smell like old wood and creek mud. You hang them on a line between two trees and watch the wind flap, your union suit like a defeated flag. Someone's goat comes by and chews on one of your sleeves. You chase it off and it gives you a look like, that's barely edible, even for me. You slip into a dry, but not with clean shirt for a bed and lay down under a blanket that crackles with static and mystery. You're itchy. You're cold. But at least you won't have to do laundry again for another week. Or 3, maybe 4. You'll know it's time when the shirt starts to stand up on its own. And as you close your eyes, surrounded by the scent of wood smoke, goats and slightly damp wool, you can't help but wonder how anyone made it through this era without just giving up and walking into the forest forever. But somehow they did. Wrinkled, filthy, and one sock short, but still standing. There's a phrase people toss around out here on the frontier, usually said with a tired sigh and a roll of the eyes. A woman's work is never done. And let me tell you, that is not a cute metaphor. It's a brutal, literal reality. From the second the sun crawls up over the horizon to the moment it drops back behind the trees, the women of the frontier are working. Scrubbing, chopping, milking, cooking, birthing, sewing, skinning, fixing, praying, and most of the time doing all of it with a baby on one hip and a toddler chewing on her skirt. You step into one of the nearby homesteads today, a small, low-roofed cabin that smells like bacon, soap, and damp wool. The woman inside is named Ruth, and she's been awake since before dawn. When you walk in, she's elbow-deep in biscuit dough, while her teenage daughter tends to a screaming infant, and her younger son is halfway through poking something dead with a stick near the fireplace. You try to help, offer to stir the beans or maybe sweep the floor, but she just laughs and points you toward the firewood pile. There's always something to do, and trust me, whatever it is, it's heavier than it looks. Women on the frontier were the backbone of the household, and not in the nice, thank you mum kind of way. We're talking about literal bone-grinding labour. The day starts with building a fire, heating water, preparing breakfast, feeding the livestock, milking the cow, if you're lucky enough to have one, and wrangling children. All before the men even finish stretching and scratching themselves in bed. And once everyone else is fed and sort of clean, the real work begins. Laundry, yes, mending clothes, boiling lard for soap, chopping vegetables for canning, rendering animal fat, churning butter, carding wool, all those relaxing domestic hobbies that require muscle, blood, and the patience of a saint with heat stroke. You watch Ruth sew a patch onto a pair of trousers while rocking a cradle with her foot and calling out instructions to her oldest, who's attempting to hang a chicken upside down for slaughter. She's doing all this while ignoring a bandage on her hand that's slowly bleeding through. When you ask if she's okay, she shrugs. Had worse. Ain't time to be delicate. There's a reason so many women out here look 20 years older than they were. Frontier life aged you. It wore you down. There were no spa days, no quiet mornings with herbal tea, no me time. And forget about help. If your husband went off hunting or trapping or died from falling off the roof, you just kept going. You had to, because no one else was going to milk that goat or feed those 9 children. Let's talk meals for a moment. Ruth's kitchen runs on instinct and leftover grease. There's no cookbook, just passed down knowledge, measurements done by feel, and the occasional guesswork involving salt and dried herbs. You ask what's for dinner, and she says, whatever don't smell too off. Charming. Fringe fact, frontier women often reused dishwater for multiple tasks. After washing dishes, the water was poured onto laundry or saved for scrubbing floors. Efficiency was survival. It's all part of what was called making do, a talent that involves stretching every resource, every meal, every minute. And here's something even more grim. Part of a woman's job was to prepare for death. Babies died, husbands fell sick, animals were lost, food spoiled, and it was often the woman's job to bury, to mourn, to clean up after, and then to keep going. You'd think they'd have time to break down and cry, but crying didn't get the butter churned. So they'd cry while scrubbing a floor or skinning a rabbit or sitting by a fire after everyone else was asleep. You sit with Ruth that evening as she darns a pair of socks by lantern light. She's humming softly, rocking gently. And now the infant is sleeping. She looks tired, isn't even the word. Hollowed out maybe, but still here. Still moving. and when you compliment her on the socks, she smiles like you handed her a medal. Scholars often debate whether frontier women were victims of circumstance or quiet heroes. The truth, again, is messier. They were both. Sometimes forced into roles they didn't choose, sometimes proud of the lives they built with their own blistered hands. Diaries from the era show both pride and pain, entries about canning peaches followed by lines like, "Buried the baby today." And the myths don't help. The Hollywood version of frontier women, flawless, hair in curls, dress blowing into the breeze, bears no resemblance to reality. These women wore layers of sweat-stained wool and cotton, had dirt under their fingernails year-round, and maybe washed their hair once a month, if that. Forget perfume. The only fragrance around here is Barnyard Ma musk. Before you head out, Ruth offers you a piece of cornbread. It's dry and a little burned, but you chew it gratefully. She leans against the table, arms folded, watching her kids wrestle in the dirt outside. "Ain't easy," she mutters, "but it's mine." You nod, not entirely sure what else to say. What can you say to someone who's doing the work of 10 people without thanks, pay, or a break? All you can do is step aside when she picks up the axe and heads outside to chop kindling before the sun goes down. You walk away that night with a newfound respect for the frontier's unsung heroes. The women who kept everyone alive, quietly, stubbornly, and often invisibly. And you know one thing for certain. The frontier didn't run on gold or glory. It ran on women's hands. Calloused, bleeding, blistered, but always moving. The cries start before dawn, sharp, primal, and unmistakable. At first you think it's an animal, maybe one of the feral dogs that circle the campfires at night. But no, it's coming from inside the neighbour's cabin. A low moan rises into a scream, and then falls again. Then another, louder this time. Someone's in labour. You're about to witness childbirth on the frontier, and fair warning, there's nothing like what you've seen in movies or read in neatly edited pioneer journals. There's no soft lighting, no hospital gowns, bundas, no sterile gloves. There's pain, buckets, sweat, a bottle of whiskey, if anyone's lucky, and a terrifying amount of improvisation. You rush over, because on the frontier everyone's involved whether they want to be or not, and duck into the cabin. The air inside is heavy, almost swampy. A fire roars in the hearth, and someone's hung a quilt across the corner of the room for privacy, although sound travels easily through the thin walls. A young woman lies on a straw mattress soaked through with sweat, her face contorted, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Her name is Ellie. She looks terrified. Beside her, a woman in her 50s, grey hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, is giving instructions with the calm authority of someone who's done this too many times to count. She's not a doctor. She's a midwife. Probably self-taught, possibly drunk, but in this moment, she's the closest thing to hope. Ellie's husband paces in the corner, pale and useless. Someone hands him a cup of whiskey and tells him to sit down before he falls over. His face is wet with tears or sweat or both. This is their first child, and no one has the heart to tell him that not everyone survives these moments. Not the mother, not the baby. On the frontier, childbirth is one of the riskiest events a woman can face. No pain meds, no antibiotics. No guarantee that anyone present has a clue what's happening beyond push and pray. You glance at the tools laid out on a cloth, scissors, thread, a spoon and some rags. That's it. There is no medical kit, no suction device, no monitors, just hands, sometimes shaking, sometimes not. The screams get louder, more urgent. Ellie is clutching a pillow so hard her knuckles are white, her lips pressed together to hold back another howl. You hear the midwife mutter something about turning wrong. She glances at another woman, and their eyes lock in a brief exchange you're not meant to see. It doesn't look good. Let's pause here for a fringe fact. On the frontier, birthing chairs were a thing. Wooden, low and often homemade, these allowed women to squat while holding onto handles or another person. Gravity did part of the work. But in many cabins, there wasn't even a chair, just the floor, sometimes hay, sometimes a blanket laid over dirt. Sanitary, not remotely. As the labour drags on, you're told to boil water. It won't be used for anything scientific, mostly just to clean the rags and give the illusion of doing something useful. You hand it over, and someone dips a cloth into it, then presses it to Ellie's forehead. She's panting now, out of breath and out of strength. There's a crash of thunder outside, because of course there is, and the baby finally begins to crown. The midwife shouts, "Now, now!" and everyone braces. There's pushing, screaming. A moment of silence so sudden it's deafening, and then, at last, a sound. A wet, gurgling cry. The baby is here. It's a girl, tiny, red, slippery, and she's quickly wrapped in a rag that looks suspiciously like an old dish towel and handed to Ellie, who's too exhausted to speak. She just stares, blinking, alive, but it's not over. The midwife is already working on delivering the afterbirth, muttering instructions no one fully understands. She checks Ellie's bleeding, nods at the state of things, and finally leans back with a deep sigh. Could have gone worse, she says, which in Frontier speak is practically a celebration. Now comes the part where everyone pretends this is normal. They clean the baby with warm cloths, cut the cord with dull scissors, and pour another round of whiskey, not for Ellie, but for everyone else, as if they'd just returned from battle. In a way, they did. Historical accounts make clear that maternal mortality was heartbreakingly common. An infection was the biggest threat. Childbed fever claimed thousands of women, often within days of giving birth. Without antiseptics or proper sterilisation, it took only one unwashed hand or reused cloth to doom a mother. And babies, nearly a third didn't survive infancy. It was so expected that some parents waited days before naming the child just in case. The scholarly debate lies in how much people really felt the weight of these losses. Were they numb to it? Hardened? Or did they carry those griefs quietly for the rest of their lives? Diaries suggest both. Some women wrote stoically, "Lost another babe today." Others broke down over miscarriages, stillbirths, and long nights by a silent crib. You step outside as the rain begins to fall. Inside, Ellie sleeps. The baby miraculously sleeps too, and for a moment all is quiet. You realise how fragile life is out here. Every breath, every heartbeat is earned. There are no guarantees, no safety nets, just the luck of the draw, the strength of your neighbours, and the stubborn will to survive one more day. As you head back to your own bed of scratchy blankets and damp wood, you carry that image with you. Ellie, hair plastered to her face, cradling of a newborn with the kind of tenderness only found in the aftermath of pain. This land may be brutal, but somehow life keeps finding a way to push through the muck. You don't realise how much you've been taking teeth for granted until one of yours starts to throb. Not a dull ache either. This is the kind of pain that pulses in sync with your heartbeat, radiating up your cheek and down your jaw, turning every bite into an exercise in courage. And now, welcome to the charming world of frontier dental care, where the only thing sharper than the pain is the pair of rusty pliers someone's about to put in your mouth. Dental hygiene on the frontier is at best an afterthought. Most people clean their teeth, if they clean them at all, by rubbing them with a cloth or using a twig frayed at one end like a tiny wooden toothbrush. Brushing is rare, flossing is non-existent, and dentists? Well, if you find one, it's usually someone who also doubles as a blacksmith or a barber. Maybe even a preacher on weekends. Either way, his main qualification is that he owns forceps and has a strong stomach. You wander around town asking about your aching molar. A man with a thick moustache and a smell that's equal parts horseshoe and whiskey points you to a shack behind the saloon. Inside is a single chair, stained and creaking, and beside it a tray of tools that could be described as medical, only if your standards are buried 6 feet under. The dentist greets you with a grunt and gestures toward the chair. There's no form to fill out, no medical history questions. He just says, "Which one hurts?" You point and he nods grimly. "Gonna need to come out." Now let's be very clear. There is no anaesthetic here. If you're lucky, he'll pour you a shot of rot-gut whiskey and tell you to bite down on a piece of leather. If you're unlucky, he skips the whiskey and just tells you to hold still. You opt for the drink, though it tastes more like paint thinner and regret, and brace yourself. The pliers are cold, your mouth is dry. The room is suddenly too bright, and then, crunch. There's a pop, a squelch, and a blinding burst of pain as the tooth is yanked free from your skull. You scream into the leather, tears involuntarily springing to your eyes. He holds the tooth up like a trophy, then drops it into a metal tray with a satisfying clink. You stagger outside with a wad of blood-soaked cloth in your mouth, half drunk from the whiskey, half numb from the trauma. A passerby claps you on the back and says, "Better out than in." You resist the urge to punch him. Dental decay was extremely common on the frontier. Sugar, when available, was used generously, and molasses-sweetened bread didn't do anyone's enamel any favours. Combine that with a total lack of dental care and voila! A mouthful of rotting teeth by your 30s, Children often lost teeth early, and adults eventually walked around with sunken cheeks and hollow smiles. And dentures? Oh yes, they existed, but not the polished pearly versions you might imagine. Some were made from wood, others from animal bone, and the fancy ones used actual human teeth, often taken from cadavers or bought off the desperate poor. If someone offers to sell you a set of teeth in a velvet pouch, say no, politely but firmly. One fringe frontier solution for toothaches involved placing a hot coal directly on the aching tooth to burn out the pain. Another suggested stuffing the cavity with cotton soaked in turpentine. You try to imagine a more unpleasant idea and come up short. You also learn that some folks swore by chewing tobacco to numb the nerves, though it seems more likely it just distracted them with nausea and eventual mouth cancer. Scholars still debate whether frontier folks suffered more from tooth loss or the infections that followed. Dental abscesses could turn deadly fast, especially without antibiotics. A simple cavity could become a festering mass of pain that spread through the jaw into the bloodstream and down into the grave. One wrong tooth was all it took. Later, around the fire, a wiry old trapper tells you how he once removed his own tooth with a pocket knife and a shot of moonshine. "Gotta be meaner than the ache," he says proudly, revealing a mouth like a collapsed barn, 2 teeth left, and both are holding on for dear life. Everyone laughs. You don't. You try to chew dinner that night, but the hole in your gum throbs with every movement. You end up swallowing most of your beans whole and sucking on a piece of boiled carrot like a child. Sleep is hard. Every heartbeat reminds you that your mouth is one small dark war zone, and the enemy has only just begun to retreat. The next morning your jaw is swollen, your lip crusted with dried blood. Someone suggests a poultice made from mustard seed and vinegar, so you slather it on and wait, hoping frontier science kicks in before infection does. It doesn't help the pain, but it does distract you with the pungent smell and a slight burning sensation on your cheek. Success? As the sun rises higher, you see people going about their day, most of them missing at least a few teeth, smiling anyway. Out here, it's just part of life. You lose a tooth, you move on. Pain is constant and endurance is a badge of honour. Still, as you pass a little girl brushing her teeth with a willow twig and spitting into the dust, you feel a strange sense of hope. Maybe she'll hold on to her teeth a little longer. Maybe her children will too, or maybe, just maybe, someone will eventually invent a toothbrush that isn't made from part of a tree. Until then, you rinse your mouth with warm salt water, grit your teeth, well, what's left of them, and carry on. Because in the Wild West, even your molars are in a fight for survival. You've been feeling a little off lately. Maybe it's the tooth extraction trauma, or maybe it's the fact that you haven't eaten anything green in days. Weeks, possibly. But there's also this strange dizziness, a persistent stomachache, and the suspicion that something might be wrong with your kidneys, or your brain. So naturally, you do what any sensible frontier settler would do. You go looking for medicine, and boy, are you about to regret it. On the American frontier, medicine is less a science and more of a choose-your-own-adventure nightmare. The line between doctor and guy with a crate of bottles and a sales pitch is razor thin, and half the time the cure is worse than the disease. You approach a small wooden shack on the edge of town, its porch cluttered with glass jars, faded labels, and a sign swinging in the breeze that reads, "Dr. Harmon's Miraculous Elixirs and General Remedies, no refunds." Perfect. Inside, the shelves are lined with bottles full of mysterious liquids in shades of brown, yellow, and something disturbingly close to green. There's a strong smell of alcohol, menthol, and possibly sadness. A man with slicked back hair and a vest too tight for his frame greets you with an overly enthusiastic smile. "You look sick," he says cheerfully. "Lucky for you, I have just the thing." He hands you a bottle of liver reviver and tonic solution, which claims to cure everything from backaches to melancholy. You ask what's in it. He says, "A little bit of everything that works." You read the label. It includes alcohol, opium, turpentine, camphor, and something called electric salts. You don't ask questions. You take a swig, and suddenly you feel fantastic. For about 20 minutes, that is. Then your stomach starts cramping, your ears ring, and you throw up behind the building. The doctor waves from the window, still smiling. "She's working!" Out here, that counts as healthcare. Most medicine sold on the frontier was snake oil in the purest sense of the phrase. Promised cures made from who knows what with just enough alcohol or morphine to make you think it's helping. Patent medicines became wildly popular during the 19th century because they didn't require a prescription and they made big promises. Want to cure baldness, ulcers, or heartbreak? There was a tonic for that. None of them worked, but at least you'd be too high to care. Some healers leaned more into the spiritual side. You pass a tent revival where a preacher is slapping foreheads and shouting about divine cures. People faint dramatically. Someone in the back is selling blessed spring water for a nickel a bottle. You try to walk past unnoticed, but someone grabs your arm and asks if you've cleansed your humours today. You say yes. They nod solemnly and let you go. Meanwhile, real doctors, if you could find one, were using tools that hadn't changed much since the 1700s. Bleeding was still a go-to remedy. Got a fever? Better drain a pint. Coughing up blood? Let's balance your humours with a leech. Most doctors carried a leather bag full of horrors. Saws, syringes, metal probes, and a bottle of ether if they were fancy. Surgery was done on the kitchen table, with no anaesthesia, unless you had a strong bottle of brandy and someone to sit on your chest. And then there's the curious case of female complaints. Women were often prescribed rest, fresh air, and calming tonics, which usually meant laudanum, a delightful mix of alcohol and opium. It knocked you out long enough to forget your problems, temporarily, until it ran out and you had to crawl back to Dr. Harmon's for another bottle. One fringe treatment involved magnets. Travelling electromedical shows toured the country, claiming they could realign your energy by waving magnetic rods over your body. People swore it worked. Maybe it did, or maybe they were just grateful someone was doing something that didn't involve knives. You spend part of the day trying other remedies, because your stomach still feels like it's full of angry hornets. A kind old woman gives you a tea made from willow bark and yarrow. It tastes like tree roots and regret, but at least it doesn't make you vomit again. Another neighbour suggests a poultice of mud and vinegar applied to your lower back. You try it. You smell like salad dressing and wet clay. No improvement. The scholarly debate about frontier medicine centres on whether people actually believed in these treatments or just used them because there were no better options. Some historians argue that belief was half the cure. If you thought it would help, it might. Others say that desperation makes people gullible. Either way, one thing's clear. The placebo effect was doing overtime out here. As the sun sets, you're curled up by the fire, still queasy, head pounding from the herbal smoke someone insisted would cleanse your insides. You've got a bandage wrapped around your midsection for no reason other than someone thought it looked healing, and you've officially sworn off all drinks that come in unmarked bottles. Still, there's something darkly charming about the way everyone pitches in. Whether it's whiskey, willow bark, or just a cold cloth and a song, folks out here try their best to heal each other with what little they have. It's rarely effective, often messy, but occasionally, through some combination of luck and stubbornness, it works. You drift off to sleep with a lumpy pillow and the faint hope that tomorrow you'll feel less like roadkill. Either that, or you'll hallucinate so hard you won't notice anymore. Either way, it's frontier medicine at its finest. Cheers to your health, what's left of it. Romance on the frontier smells like goats. That's your first takeaway. Not flowers, not perfume, not letters soaked in rosewater. No, the overwhelming scent of early courtship out here is equal parts livestock, wood smoke, and somebody's armpit after a long day of fence mending. And yet somehow love still happens. People fall for each other across fields, through wagon windows, over bartering tables, and during Saturday barn dances, wearing 3 layers of wool and nursing a persistent rash. There's no dating app to swipe through, no flirtatious DMs, not even a functioning postal system half the time. So if you want to meet someone, your best bet is proximity. The nearest eligible person within a 5-mile radius is basically your soulmate by default. Your options are limited, and your standards adapt accordingly. Suddenly that guy with both ears and most of his teeth is looking pretty appealing. You find yourself visiting the Widow Tilly's homestead with a neighbour who's been courting her daughter Clara. Courting, in this case, means showing up twice a week with something mildly useful, like firewood, cured meat, or a working knee joint, and staying long enough to make awkward conversation without being chased off with a broom. Clara sits across the room, cheeks red from cold or blushing or both, and you can practically feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. They talk about the weather, then beans, then whether beans will grow this season. You've never heard 2 people say the word beans with more intensity. It's weirdly touching. Out here, small gestures speak volumes. A new hair ribbon, a repaired door hinge, a seat saved at church, all are signs of serious interest. A letter delivered by hand? That's practically a marriage proposal. And if someone gives you a sweet cake on Sunday, it means either they like you, or they're trying to poison you with affection. Either way, say thank you. But intimacy moves slowly. Very slowly. Physical affection is rare, at least in public. A touch of the hand, a brush of the sleeve, a stolen glance, those are the high drama moments. You attend a barn dance that evening, and the electricity of two hands connecting during a clumsy reel feels more charged than any kiss in a modern romance film. By the time Clara's suitor walks her home and tips his hat, the crowd is practically swooning. Here's a fringe fact. Frontier etiquette books did exist, and they outlined some pretty strict courting rules. For instance, men were advised not to linger too long in the parlour, and women were warned not to accept gifts of too great a value, lest it signal improper interest, which is funny considering most gifts were practical. He brought me a bag of flour, one girl wrote in her diary. Mama says he's serious. Now, marriage isn't always about love. Often, it's about survival. Two people working together are stronger than one. A woman needs a man to help manage the land, protect the home, bring in income. A man needs a woman to cook, clean, bear children, and keep the house from collapsing into chaos. So sometimes people marry quickly, sometimes they marry out of convenience, and sometimes they marry because there are only 4 other single people in the entire county. You sit on a porch that evening, watching a pair of newlyweds struggle to load a goat into a wagon. She's laughing. He's trying not to get head-butted. There's an ease between them that suggests comfort rather than passion. But maybe that's what love is out here. Less fireworks, more figuring out how to keep the animals from eating your bedding. And let's not forget the awkward rituals of arranged pairings. Parents often nudged their children towards certain families, ones with land, animals, or just a good reputation. Sometimes they were subtle. Sometimes they just flat out said, "You're marrying Eustace, he's got a plough." Romantic, right? Then there were mail-order brides, women from the East who agreed to marry strangers in the West after exchanging letters. Ads ran in newspapers offering respectable bachelors with honest wages and clean cabins. The women, often desperate to escape poverty or bad situations, agreed to pack up their lives and marry someone sight unseen. It's part love story, part survival strategy, and part social experiment. Some of those marriages worked beautifully, others not so much. You ask one older woman how she met her husband. She grins and says, "He asked me if I could make coffee without burning it. I said no, he married me anyway." They have been together 40 years. Scholars argue about the emotional depth of frontier marriages. Were these true partnerships, or just practical arrangements? Did romance bloom later, or was it sacrificed to the daily grind of survival? Personal letters suggest a mix. Some couples grew deeply affectionate over time, their bond strengthened by shared hardship, others not so much. You find one journal entry from a wife who wrote, "He died quietly in the field. I finished the laundry before going to get him. Make of that what you will. As night falls, you pass by Clara's cabin again. Her suitor is just leaving, his boots crunching softly on the frost-covered path. She stands at the doorway, watching him go, her arms wrapped around herself, not just from the cold. And then, just before he disappears into the trees, he turns and tips his hat. She smiles. You exhale. Romance, frontier style, subtle, sincere, smelly. You lie in bed under your scratchy wool blanket, thinking about how love looks different out here. It's not about candles or poetry or elaborate proposals. It's about showing up, hauling water, sharing food, staying through sickness and stubborn winters. And every now and then, it's about someone remembering to bring you a biscuit just the way you like it. Burnt on one side, soft on the other. Love may smell like goats, but somehow it works. You wake up on a Sunday, which on the frontier doesn't mean brunch and leisure. It means church, chores, and maybe a little bit of something resembling entertainment if the weather doesn't ruin it and nobody's come down with dysentery. The good news? You're not digging a latrine today. The bad news? You'll probably spend the afternoon pretending that watching a chicken peck at a stick counts as a fun time. The truth is, frontier entertainment walks a very thin line between wholesome diversion and slow creeping insanity. With no movie theatres, no streaming, and absolutely zero jazz hands, people have to get creative. And by creative, we mean repetitive, slightly dangerous, and occasionally sad. Today starts with church, which is less about religion and more about gathering the entire community into one room for 3 hours of socializing disguised as a sermon. The chapel is a small wooden building that looks like it might blow over in a stiff wind. Inside, the benches are splintered, the windows frost over, and the hymns are sung with more volume than harmony. The preacher delivers his message with the intensity of someone trying to save souls and keep everyone from falling asleep, which is fair, because he's competing with the warmth of the wood stove and the hypnotic rhythm of Mrs. Abernathy's snoring. But here's the secret about church out here. It's the social event of the week. It's where you hear who's courting who traded for a new pig, who's got a mysterious rash, and which family's cow went missing under suspicious circumstances. The gossip flows faster than the sermon, and you start to suspect people show up more for the side chatter than the salvation. After the final hymn, sung by the entire congregation in what can only be described as spiritual yelling, people mill around outside and in the brittle sunlight, catching up and quietly judging each other's boots. You overhear a child ask what fun thing they'll do today, and the father replies, "Well, we'll look at the pond for a while." You feel that. Back at the homestead, you join a group preparing for an evening frolic. The word implies something jolly and quaint, but don't be fooled. Frolic usually means barn dancing, storytelling, or occasionally everyone showing up to one person's house to help them build something while pretending it's a party. "We're raising a roof and raising a ruckus," they joke. You laugh nervously while hauling a beam the size of a small tree. Once the work is done, someone pulls out a fiddle. The instrument is slightly warped, with one string held together by a bit of twine, but the sound it makes is joyful enough. People start to dance, which mostly involves stomping in rhythm and trying not to fall over. It's chaotic. No one knows exactly what they're doing. One man loses his hat, another loses his shoe. A woman claps offbeat while holding a baby who's trying to eat her hair. Somehow it all works. Children run into circles around the adults, chasing each other with sticks and inventing games with rules so elaborate that even they forget how it works halfway through. Someone brings out a sack of marbles. Another kid insists on putting a frog in a boot. You suspect that the frog is now a permanent resident. The adults, meanwhile, settle into storytelling. A grizzled old man named Cyrus begins to spin a yarn about the time he outran a bobcat on a dare. The story gets more dramatic each time he tells it, and tonight it includes him swinging from a tree with nothing but a rope and raw courage. You ask quietly if it's true. The woman next to you replies, "He once lost a fight with a turkey, so no." But storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's oral history. It's how knowledge gets passed down when there are no books, no schools, and no real free time. You learn which herbs are safe to chew, how to keep raccoons out of the pantry, and that Old Man Kettle once built a windmill that fell over and flattened his outhouse. That last one gets told a lot. Here's a fringe fact. Some frontier towns had travelling entertainers, minstrels, puppet shows, even amateur theatre troupes who rode from settlement to settlement, performing in barns or out in fields. Their performances were rough around the edges, sometimes incomprehensible, but people loved them. A bad play was still better than staring at a tree and wondering if it moved. Now, the scholarly debate. Was frontier entertainment actually fun, or just a distraction from how bad everything else was? Some historians argue that these gatherings were vibrant and joyful, full of music, laughter, and connection. Others say the fun was more of a defense mechanism, a way to cope with isolation and hardship. Judging by tonight's mixture of dancing, bickering, and cow-related injuries, it's probably both. As night falls, the dancing slows and the fire crackles low. You sit on a log, eating a chunk of mystery pie and listening to someone softly play Shady Grove on a homemade banjo. There's a strange peace in the simplicity of it all. No fireworks, no loud crowds, no ticket stubs, just people making their own fun with what they've got. Before bed, you watch the stars appear, sharp and bright in the wide open sky. A coyote howls in the distance. Someone lets out a belch and says, "That's the spirit." You figure that's a good enough ending to the evening. You crawl into bed tired in a new way, not worn down from work but from people, laughter, and the effort of being social in a world that usually only requires survival. As you drift off, you think maybe, just maybe, looking at the pond isn't the worst idea after all. If the frog's still in that boot, you might even name him. You're no stranger to discomfort by now. You've scratched through flea infestations, lost a tooth to a man with unlicensed pliers, and eaten more mystery stew than you care to admit. But nothing quite prepares you for travel on the American frontier. This isn't your cross-country road trip with snacks and rest stops. This is a brutal, bone-shaking, soul-draining endurance test disguised as a journey. And if you're smart, you'll write your will before the wagon leaves the yard. Today you're heading with a small caravan to a nearby trading post. It's only 20 miles away, but everyone is preparing like it's a voyage to Mars. The wagon's wheels are being reinforced with rope. Barrels are strapped down with layers of belts, chains, and what looks like someone's Sunday best. A woman ties a chicken into a basket using strips of old curtain, and someone else is arguing with their ox. Not guiding it, arguing. The ox is winning. You climb into the back of a wagon, wedging yourself between a sack of flour and a crate of potatoes, and immediately regret every life choice that brought you to this moment. The wagon starts to move, and within the first 5 minutes, your spine begins a slow, grinding protest that will continue for the next 7 hours. The wheels creak. The axles moan. Every rock in the road feels personal. The road itself, if you can call it that, is more suggestion than infrastructure. It's rutted, uneven, and occasionally disappears into a creek. Mud sucks at the wheels, branches whip at your face, and the whole thing smells like manure and anxiety. You pass over a crude log bridge that looks like it was built by someone with a grudge against gravity, and for a terrifying moment, one wheel dangles in open air. You squeeze the flour sack like it owes you emotional support. Let's not forget the animals. Horses go lame. Mules sit down mid-journey and refuse to move. Oxen trudge forward with the emotional energy of a hungover philosophy student. One family's wagon gets stuck in a ditch, and it takes 12 people, a prayer circle, and a broken shovel to get it moving again. And walking? Don't even think about it unless your boots are made of steel and your threshold for blisters is dangerously high. The terrain shifts constantly, dirt to gravel to swamp to surprise cactus patch. You meet a man walking barefoot, carrying his shoes because he swears it's better that way. His feet look like tree bark. He nods at you solemnly. Shoes are liars, he says. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some people walked the entire length of the Oregon Trail, over 2,000 miles, on purpose because their wagons were too full and they wanted to spare the animals. They walked beside their carts in heat, dust and hail, with sores on their feet the size of flapjacks, and they did this for months. You struggle after 10 miles and contemplate throwing yourself into the nearest bush. Around midday, the wagon train stops for lunch. By lunch, we mean a piece of dry bread, a strip of jerky, and water so murky it might have been soup in a past life. Everyone squats in the shade of their own disappointment, stretching their aching legs and comparing bruises. You realise your right hip has gone numb. You accept it like one more tax paid to the gods of westward movement. Travel was slow. 20 miles could take an entire day, or longer, if someone broke a wheel, lost a horse, or got violently ill, which happened often. You pass a woman on the trail who's sitting on a stump with her head in her hands. "I can't do it," she mutters. "I miss chairs." You nod, understanding deeply. Scholars debate just how grueling frontier travel was, with some arguing that people adapted quickly and toughened up. Others insist the constant jostling, injuries, and exposure to the elements left everyone physically broken by the time that they reached their destination. You lean toward the latter, judging by the current condition of your lower spine. Later in the day, your wagon crosses a stream, no bridge this time, just a reckless plunge through water up to the axles. Everyone lifts their belongings as high as possible. You watch as someone's entire sack of cornmeal floats away. They just stare after it, hollow-eyed. "We'll eat the leather again," someone jokes. It's not funny. As evening approaches, the wagons pull into a clearing to make camp. Fires are lit, coffee is brewed and dinner is served, more beans because beans are the frontier's cruelest inside joke. A man tends to his mule's sore hoof, another woman uses a belt to brace her swollen ankle, and someone's trying to get the smoke to blow the other way, with zero success. You chew your beans slowly, watching sparks rise into the dusk and wonder if your spine will ever forgive you. You set up a bedroll under the wagon because you can't bring yourself to climb back inside. The ground is hard, yes, but at least it's not moving. Stars appear above you, and your muscles finally begin to unwind just a little. You overhear someone softly singing a hymn. Another person's already snoring head against a wheel, and in this moment, despite the soreness, the hunger, and the constant threat of stepping in horse manure barefoot, there's a strange peace to it all. The journey is brutal, but you're not alone. Everyone's miserable together, and somehow, that makes it better. Tomorrow you'll wake up sore, grumpy, and probably covered in dew or ants. But for now, you let the crickets lull you into something like sleep. Out here, travel isn't about the destination. It's about enduring the ride without losing your mind or your cornbread. You wake to shouting, not the excited, happy kind. This is the kind of shouting that comes before someone gets shot, stabbed, or mistakenly hanged. It's still barely light out, the sky just beginning to shake off its stars, and already someone's lost their mind. You crawl out from under the wagon, wiping dew off your face, and shuffle toward the noise like everyone else. Welcome to the frontier's version of morning television. Crime, justice, and good old-fashioned suspicion. Two men are standing chest to chest in the middle of this camp, red-faced and growling. One's accusing the other of stealing his boots, yes, his actual boots, and the other swears he's had those boots since Indiana. You look down. They're the same mud stains, same worn-out heel. Honestly, it's hard to tell. Frontier thefts are rarely grand. It's always something small but essential. A tin cup, a rope, a coat, and in this case a pair of boots that now might cost a man his life. The camp judge, who is also the cook and occasionally the fiddle player, steps in to mediate. This means everyone gathers around while he asks 3 barely coherent questions and then flips a coin to decide who he believes. The bootless man loses the toss. He starts yelling about the law, but someone nearby shrugs and mutters, "This is the law," and that's the unsettling truth. Justice on the frontier is a chaotic blend of neighbourly consensus, grudges, and very loud opinions. There are sheriffs in some towns, sure, but often they're underpaid, outnumbered, and a little too friendly with the local saloon. In smaller settlements, justice is do-it-yourself. Got a problem? Grab your neighbours and sort it out over a campfire and a bottle of whiskey. What could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, plenty. Theft, murder, horse rustling, land disputes, public drunkenness, and occasionally something as petty as "he looked at me wrong" could all escalate into full-on courtroom drama, minus the courtroom. You hear a story from an older man about a town that once held a trial inside a barn using a pig as the jury. The defendant bribed the pig with corn and no one was convicted. Honestly, it sounds plausible. Vigilante justice was more than just folklore. It was common. Groups of self-appointed enforcers, often calling themselves regulators, would round up suspects and deliver punishments without trial. Sometimes they were right, sometimes not so much. One guy was hanged for stealing a horse, only to have the horse trot back home a week later on its own. Oops, it happens. Fringe fact. Some frontier communities use something called a lynch law, named after Charles Lynch, a Revolutionary-era figure who encouraged informal justice without formal legal procedures. Basically, if enough people agreed you were guilty, that was good enough. They'd drag you out to the nearest tree, and the rope did the rest. No paperwork needed. Today's boot fiasco fizzles out when someone suggests they both take one boot and walk half barefoot for a week to learn humility. No one's thrilled about the compromise, but everyone's too tired to argue. The crowd drifts away, muttering about breakfast. You wonder what's more dangerous out here, the elements or each other. Later in town you pass the jail, if it can even be called that. It's a one-room log structure with iron bars in one window, and a door that looks like it's held shut with hope and a bent nail. Inside is a man accused of trying to pay for supplies with a rock he swears is gold. He's not dangerous, just annoying. Still, someone figured a night behind bars might teach him the difference between minerals and money. Some towns had circuit judges who rode from settlement to settlement, holding court in taverns or someone's parlour. They brought with them law books, fancy clothes, and an air of authority, until they ran into the local drunk who decided he didn't recognise their power. In one case, the judge was held hostage by the defendant until everyone agreed it was just a misunderstanding. Then there's the issue of guns. Everyone's armed, most people have no formal training, and tempers are as short as the supply of sugar. You hear another story. A gambler accused of cheating shot in the leg before he could deny it. His defence? "I'm just lucky." They let him go. He limped away still smiling. Scholars have long debated whether frontier justice was necessary, or just an excuse for mob rule. Some argue it kept people in line when official systems couldn't. Others say it bred corruption and fear. Both are probably true. You quickly learn that fairness isn't the goal out here. Order is, or at least the illusion of it. As evening falls, a trial begins on the edge of camp. This time it's over a missing pig. The accused swears he never touched it. The accuser claims he saw hoofprints leading straight to the man's tent. The judge, a woman named Dot who's known for her pie and her absolute intolerance for nonsense, listens quietly, then declares, "If the pig's still alive, it'll come home. If not, you owe him a ham." Case closed. You sit by the fire that night, staring into the flames, trying to make peace with the fact that your fate could one day rest in the hands of someone who can't spell jury. There are no appeals, no second chances, just quick decisions, quicker tempers, and sometimes a noose. Still, for all its faults, there's a strange kind of justice in this messy system. People watch out for their own. Lies don't last long in small places, and if you're decent, honest, and keep your boots close, you'll probably get by. Probably, you finally meet a real cowboy, and immediately your mental image collapses like a saloon door in a windstorm. There's no polished six-shooter gleaming on his hip, no white hat catching the sunset just right. He's not riding into town like a hero from a dime novel either. No, he's trudging through the mud on foot, holding his boots in one hand and a handful of cow dung in the other, muttering something about stupid, miserable steers. He smells like wet leather, sunburn and regret. Turns out the myth of the noble cowboy is just that, a myth, popularised later by the books and Hollywood. The real cowboy is far less glamorous, more blisters, fewer heroic shootouts. You follow him as he returns to the cattle camp, a ramshackle sprawl of canvas tents, makeshift corrals, and a cook fire that's more smoke than flame. He flops onto a pile of burlap sacks and starts picking cactus spines out of his socks with the tip of his knife. "You want glamour," he grunts. "Go east." The life of a cowboy is brutal, repetitive, and often thankless. Up at dawn, herding cattle across miles of open terrain, eating cold beans and dry biscuits, and sleeping under the stars, or in the dirt depending on how generous the weather feels. Most cowboys aren't even landowners. They're hired hands, often young, often broke, and always at the mercies of weather, stampedes and bad coffee. You ride out with a group on a cattle drive, yes, just to see what it's like. The sun comes up fast, and already it's too hot. The herd moves slowly at first, then faster, then in sudden chaotic bursts, and easily crush your horse. Dust clouds billow around you until your entire face is coated in grit. A steer breaks from the group and runs for the hills, and two riders bolt after it, swearing loudly. One returns with the steer, the other returns with a limp and a busted hat. Lunch is hardtack and jerky eaten in silence. Nobody's talking, because they're too busy chewing. Someone tries to whistle and nearly chokes. You learn quickly that water is life, every drop saved, hoarded, and rationed like gold. Most cowboys carry a canteen tied to their saddle, and drink only when absolutely necessary. You make the mistake of drinking too much and spend the next hour begging for more. And the pay? Don't even ask. Cowboys earn about $1 a day, if that. Sometimes they get paid in supplies or IOUs. Most of them are in it for the promise of steady work, even if it comes with saddle sores and a high probability of getting trampled. And yet they keep riding. Why? Because for some, this is freedom. It's rough, raw and unfiltered, but it's theirs. Here's a fringe fact. Many cowboys weren't white. Historians estimate that up to a quarter were black, and many more were Mexican or Native American. Yet the romanticized version of the cowboy somehow became almost exclusively white in popular culture. The real cowboy landscape was far more diverse than most stories let on, with crews made up of people from all backgrounds, bonded by the shared misery of dust, sun and mooing. Night falls and the campfires flicker. The cowboys gather close, sipping thick coffee from dented tin cups. One of them tunes a battered guitar and sings a slow, mournful tune about a girl back in Missouri who probably doesn't remember his name. You sit nearby, warming your hands and trying to ignore the dull ache in your thighs from a full day of riding. Your boots are stiff, your back hurts, and you've acquired at least 3 new blisters. You start to wonder if walking barefoot across cactus fields might be the better option. Sleep comes in a bedroll on the ground, with your hat pulled low and a rifle by your side in case of coyotes, or worse, cattle rustlers. It's not exactly peaceful. The wind howls. A cow moos aggressively every few minutes like it's offended by your dreams. Someone nearby is snoring with violent commitment. And just when you think you've found a rhythm, a mosquito lands directly on your eyeball. Some historians have tried to glamorize cowboy life as rugged individualism at its finest, while others paint a more accurate, less flattering portrait. Men constantly on the move, underpaid, overworked, and largely ignored by the very cattle barons who made fortunes off their labour. The cowboy was a working-class hero, yes, but also an expendable one. Still, you can't deny the strange poetry of it all. The endless sky, the silhouettes of riders on a distant ridge, the creak of saddles and the thunder of hooves echoing through wide, empty plains. Even the exhaustion has a kind of honesty to it. You're not pretending to be anything out here. You're just trying not to fall off your horse or lose your hat in the wind. You wake the next morning with a sore neck, a dirty face, and a new appreciation for chairs. The herd is already moving again, and the cowboy you followed yesterday hands you a piece of dried meat and says, "Don't fall behind, Greenhorn." You nod, still chewing, and swing up into the saddle with all the grace of a sack of potatoes. And as the dust rises around you once more, you realise something unexpected. You're not good at this. You're not strong, or fast, or particularly useful, but for a moment, under that blazing sun with the rhythm of hooves pounding into the earth, you feel like a cowboy, a very sore, extremely sunburned, slightly miserable cowboy. But still, by the time your boots hit the ground back in town, your entire body is one giant complaint. Your muscles are furious, your throat is dry, and your skin has officially entered its reptilian leather phase. You're vaguely aware of a sunburn forming in the exact shape of your hatband, and your lips have cracked in 3 places from dust, dehydration, and whistling the world's saddest cowboy tune. You stumble into the saloon for a drink, and that's when you hear it. Someone coughing, not a polite dry little ahem. No, this is the deep rattling, chest-clawing kind of cough that turns heads and clears tables. You look over and see a man hunched over, pale and sweating, a handkerchief pressed to his mouth. When he pulls it away, it's smeared with blood. The barkeep doesn't even blink. "Another one," he mutters, already moving the man's whiskey aside. "It's going to be a bad season." Welcome to the true terror of frontier life. Disease. Not bullets, not bears, not bandits, but invisible enemies carried in water, on hands, through air, and between people crowded together in cabins that don't believe in windows or fresh air. You might dodge a rattlesnake out on the trail, only to be taken down by a sneeze from your neighbour's toddler. You step outside and suddenly everything looks different. You remember how many people shook your hand this week, how often you drank from the communal water bucket, how many times you've shared a spoon with someone over a pot of beans. There are no sterilised forks here, no hand sanitizer, no emergency room waiting down the street. What you've got is whiskey, a prayer, and a bedroll. Let's talk greatest hits. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, scarlet fever, smallpox, malaria, and tuberculosis. Each one with its own horrifying symptoms, none of them fully understood by the people actually getting them. Germ theory is still considered suspicious science by a lot of folks out here, and the idea of bacteria sounds like something invented to scare people into buying soap. You pass a house with a red cloth tied to the door, an improvised quarantine signal. No one goes in or out. Someone on the porch is crying quietly. You keep walking. Cholera is the worst. It spreads through contaminated water, something there's plenty of, and it kills fast. You can be fine at breakfast and dead by supper. Vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration until you shrivel like an old leather boot. When it hits a town, it doesn't pick favourites. You've heard stories of entire families gone within days. They bury them in shallow graves because the ground's too hard to dig deep. 1 coffin, 5 names, dysentery's no better. Same basic idea, filthy water, contaminated food, shared utensils, and boom, everyone's sick. You spend days fevered and collapsing on your way to the outhouse, if you make it that far. You're lucky if you don't pass out mid-step and face-plant into a ditch. Again, no doctors, just home remedies, boiled herbs, and whispered hopes. Then there's tuberculosis. Consumption, as folks call it. You know the look, pale face, red cheeks, constant cough. The slow fade, the coughing of blood into rags. They say fresh air helps, so people sleep outside in all seasons. Some move west because they're sick, hoping the tinned dry air will do what no doctor could. Most still die, but now at least they die with a view. Fringe fact. There were frontier pest houses where the infected were quarantined, often on the edge of town. Think of them as the last stop, a room with a cot, a bucket, and maybe a Bible if someone remembered. Some towns burn them down between outbreaks. You try not to think too hard about why. You visit the local healer, who's more root cellar than medical office. She brews teas from bark and berries, waves sage smoke around your face, and gives you a cloth to wear over your nose filled with dried herbs. You look like someone cosplaying as a sickly raccoon, but hey, you don't feel any worse. Yet. Scholars continue to debate how effective these treatments were. Some argue that traditional remedies, especially those used by native communities, offered genuine relief. Others believe survival often came down to sheer luck and strong constitutions. You start to suspect that luck plays a far bigger role than anyone wants to admit. At night, the sound of coughing echoes through the settlement like a kind of music, sharp, rhythmic, tragic. You cover your face with a bandana and pull your blanket up to your chin, as if that'll keep the germs out. You're not even sick yet, but the fear of sickness seeps into every part of your routine. Is the water safe? Did that meat smell off? Was that handshake worth it? And it's not just the physical toll. Disease wears people down in spirit. It changes how they gather, how they speak. You notice more people praying, more people sitting quietly outside, not talking. It's like everyone's waiting for something they can't see, something that might already be inside them. Then comes the burial. A small group walks slowly down the trail carrying a pine box. No procession, no music, just a hole, a few words and silence. The preacher says, "The Lord gives and takes." Someone spits into the dirt. Life continues. Dinner still needs making. Firewood still needs chopping. But you can feel the absence in the air, even if no one says it out loud. You return to your bunk that night, washing your hands with cold water and lye soap until your skin cracks. You gargle salt, chew pine needles, and wrap your blanket tighter. You're not sick yet. But out here, it's never a question of if, only when. And when it does come, no matter how much tea you drink or how many herbs you stuff up your nose, you'll face it like everything else on the frontier, with quiet dread, a stiff upper lip, and the faint hope that someone will remember your name when the coughing finally stops. Mail arrives today, or at least that's the rumour. In a world where the average travel speed is slightly slower than a determined squirrel, getting a letter is a momentous event. People gather near the trading post like it's Christmas morning, everyone half expecting to see their name scrawled in a stranger's handwriting on a battered envelope that's spent the last 2 months dodging floods, wolves, and careless stagecoach drivers with questionable hygiene. You wander over to the cluster of hopefuls, all huddled around a man in a wide-brimmed hat pulling papers from a canvas sack like a magician who's really bad at card tricks. "Jebediah Turner," he announces. "A tall man cheers. Mrs. Clarabelle Finch." A frail woman bursts into tears. "Lem?" Silence. "Just says Lem." No one responds. The man shrugs and tucks the letter back into his coat. Maybe Lem died. Maybe Lem never existed. Frontier Mail doesn't ask questions. You, of course, get nothing. Again, it's been 5 months since you last heard from anyone back east. And at this point, you're beginning to wonder if your family just assumed you were eaten by a bear and moved on. It's fine, really. You didn't need to know how the wedding went or whether your cousin's new baby looks like a potato. You walk away casually, like you didn't even care. But deep down, it stings. Mail on the frontier is notoriously unreliable. Some towns only receive deliveries every month, or longer, depending on how passable the trails are, how sober the courier is, or whether someone robbed the stagecoach again. Letters often arrive torn, water-damaged, or mysteriously opened. Packages. Good luck. A shipment of boots once showed up with one shoe missing and a possum inside the box. That possum now lives in the saloon and drinks from unattended mugs. The US Postal Service technically exists, but service is a generous term. The frontier stretches far beyond official routes, and most deliveries rely on private carriers, volunteer riders, or that one guy who knows how to not get lost in the woods. Some letters are passed from hand to hand across towns until they reach their destination. Others vanish completely, presumed lost to rivers, fires, or postal employees who decided they deserved a little reading material. Here's a fun fringe fact. In more remote settlements, it wasn't unusual for residents to all gather and read their letters aloud. Not just to share news, but because many people were functionally illiterate. A travelling preacher, a schoolteacher, or just a kid with basic reading skills would stand in front of the crowd and say things like, "Dearest Margaret, your Aunt Hattie's gout has worsened," while everyone nodded solemnly and passed around dried apples. Meanwhile, gossip remains the unofficial communication network. You might not have mail, but you do have a woman named Edith who knows everything about everyone and is perfectly willing to tell you loudly while rearranging her laundry on the line. She informs you that the baker's wife ran off with the tanner, that the new preacher has suspiciously smooth hands, and that someone's been writing anonymous love poems and leaving them in the outhouse. "I suspect Abigail," she whispers. Too many big words. Of course, not all mail is personal. Newspapers, when they arrive, are precious commodities. Even if they're 3 weeks out of date, they're devoured like fresh cornbread. People read them front to back, then again for good measure. Afterward, they're used as insulation, bandages, wrapping paper, and occasionally toilet paper. Nothing's wasted. You manage to borrow one that's only mildly crumpled and sit by the fire reading news from a city you've never seen. There's something oddly comforting about knowing that somewhere, far away, people are still arguing about politics, publishing letters to the editor, and advertising new hat styles no one out here can afford. One article mentions a theatre scandal involving an actress and a stolen mink. You read it twice, then offer it to the nearest stranger just so someone else can be equally confused. Scholars have long discussed the role of mail in keeping frontier morale intact. Letters were lifelines, proof that you still existed to someone. They reminded people they weren't entirely lost to the wilderness, that beyond the forests and plains there was still family, civilization, normalcy. The delay didn't matter so much, it was the connection. Even if the letter was already outdated by the time it arrived, it still mattered. That night, someone reads a letter out loud by the lantern light. It's from a daughter back east, writing to her parents on the homestead. She mentions a new piano teacher, the smell of lilacs in the spring, and how she hopes her father's cough has gone away. Her handwriting is neat. Her words are simple, but by the end, her mother is crying quietly into her apron, and no one says a word. Not because it's sad, but because it's everything. Just knowing someone remembers you is a kind of medicine out here. You lie back, staring up at the stars, wondering if your last letter even made it. If someone back home is reading it by firelight, tracing the words you scrawled with a trembling hand after too many nights without sleep. Maybe they smiled. Maybe they didn't. Either way, you promise yourself you'll write another one soon, even if the odds of it arriving are about the same as finding a gold nugget in your soup. Out here, hope travels by horse, and it's always late. You never really notice how flammable everything is until you're watching someone's roof catch fire from 50 yards away. 1 minute it's a quiet evening, the sky bruised with sunset, the chickens wandering aimlessly like they always do. The next, there's a burst of orange at the edge of your vision, followed by the unmistakable crackle of dry wood giving in to heat. You drop the tin cup in your hand and start running with everyone else. Someone's shouting, someone's crying, and someone is, for reasons unclear, carrying a goat. The cabin belongs to the Ellisons. You remember them because they have 5 kids and a homemade rocking chair that looks like it's trying to escape itself. Now their roof is fully ablaze, flames leaping skyward with terrifying enthusiasm. The fire moves fast, way too fast. In a matter of minutes, the smoke is thick enough to sting your eyes, and sparks are hopping onto the nearby fence like they're looking for more trouble. Everyone's scrambling. Buckets of water are passed down a crooked human chain from the well. One man's throwing dirt at the fire with his bare hands, which is less helpful than he seems to think, but his effort is noted. Someone brings out a wet blanket and tries to smother a window frame, and in the middle of all this chaos, Mrs. Ellison is calmly directing her children like a general in a very flammable army. "Get the quilt," she yells. "Not that one, the good quilt." You help carry out a trunk that smells like smoke and mice. The eldest Ellison boy grabs his little sister, tucks her under one arm like a sack of potatoes, and sprints into the field. The fire doesn't care. It's not picky. It eats wood, hay, furniture, curtains, and someone's beloved rocking chair with the same fiery appetite. By the time the flames finally sputter out, the cabin is a smoking shell of its former self, and everyone's covered in soot, sweat, and a new level of existential exhaustion. This is the frontier's great secret. Everything you build, grow, store, and love, everything can be gone in minutes. Fire is not just a risk out here, it's a fact of life. Let's start with the basics. Most buildings are made of wood, dry, untreated, sun-baked wood. Roofs are often covered with thatch, bark, or, if you're real fancy, cedar shingles, none of which are known for their resistance to open flame. Add a fireplace, a cook stove, a lantern with a wobbly wick, and several small children who don't understand the concept of stop, drop and roll, and you've got a bonfire waiting to happen. Frontier lighting isn't exactly OSHA approved either. Candles are made from tallow, aka rendered animal fat, and they burn unevenly, sometimes dripping flaming grease onto your table, your books, or your lap. Oil lamps spill, lanterns break, And if a spark lands in the wrong place, good night, Irene. Here's a charming fringe fact. Some folks used to dry their laundry by hanging it above the fireplace. Yes, over an open flame, because nothing says home-style charm like socks raining down in flames. You wonder how many shirts burst into fire before they considered building an outdoor clothesline. Now what about outside? Oh, you think you're safe just because you're under the stars? Think again. Campfires spread easily in dry brush and wind carries sparks like malicious little messengers. One gust can take an innocent cooking fire and turn it into a full-scale prairie blaze. And if your fields are dry, which they usually are in midsummer, you're just sitting on acres of potential disaster. A single careless ember could erase a season's worth of crops before you can even say fetch water. You ask around and discover that nearly everyone in town has a fire story. Some have two. One man tells you about a neighbour who accidentally set his barn on fire trying to light a cigar. The flames spread so fast he had to run out half-dressed, chasing his mule with one boot on. Another woman tells you she lost her first cabin when her husband knocked over a lantern during an argument. The fire ended the argument, she says flatly. Scholars debate how much of frontier fire prevention was based on actual planning versus sheer luck. Some communities established bucket brigades or kept barrels of water outside every building. Others just crossed their fingers and hoped it wasn't their turn. Fireproofing wasn't really a thing yet, unless you counted burying valuables in the yard and praying. You spend part of the next day helping the Ellison sort through the wreckage. Bits of charred wood, the warped iron of a stove, the blackened remains of what was probably once a Sunday dress. Somehow a tin of buttons survived. Mrs. Ellison picks it up, rattles it next to her ear and mutters, "Well, I guess I'll start sewing again." You don't know whether to laugh or cry. That night you find yourself triple-checking your own lantern, repositioning the fireplace screen, and pulling your boots a little closer, just in case you need to run barefoot into the cold. The smell of smoke still lingers in the air, a reminder of how quickly things can go sideways, and how permanent the consequences can be. Before sleep, you hear someone on the edge of town building a new chimney. You hear hammering, the scrape of stone, and the muffled sound of someone swearing about their thumb. The rebuilding begins almost immediately because there's no time to grieve a house when winter's only a few months away. And somehow, even knowing the risk, people still light fires. They still cook. They still boil water for coffee and warm their hands by the hearth. Because without fire, life is cold, raw, and impure. So they carry the danger with them carefully like a lit lantern on a windy night, hoping it doesn't slip from their hands. You've been warned about gold fever, but it still catches you off guard, probably because it doesn't show up as a real fever. No sweating, no chills, no rash. Just wide, glassy eyes, a twitchy obsession with rocks, and the unwavering belief that the next handful of dirt you sift through might make you rich enough to buy a whole town, or at least a proper pair of socks. Today, you find yourself elbow deep in freezing river mud surrounded by men who haven't blinked in hours, or because someone up the mountain swears they saw a glint of something shiny. The gold rush wasn't just a moment in history, it was a collective hallucination. Thousands packed up everything they had, left behind homes, families, and sometimes common sense, and trudged into the wilds of California, Colorado, the Black Hills, or wherever someone scribbled "gold here" on a napkin. The promise was always the same: easy riches, instant success, and a life of luxury. The reality? Mud, frostbite, back-breaking labour, and the delightful scent of unwashed optimism. Your current camp is a scattered mess of tents, lean-tos, and dreams rotting in burlap sacks. Smoke curls up from hundreds of tiny fires. Tin pans clatter against rocks. Everywhere there's shouting, some excited, some angry, some just unintelligible grunting over the sound of rushing water. You set up near a man with a full beard and half a boot. He nods solemnly, then spends the next 4 hours poking a silt pile with a stick. No gold, just bugs. Panning is the beginner's game. You squat by the river and swirl gravel in a wide pan, watching for that miraculous sparkle. Your legs go numb in the water. Your back stiffens. Your hands prune. After 2 hours, your only discovery is a small shiny button someone else dropped weeks ago. You hold it up. The bearded man sighs. Don't get greedy. Other folks have moved on to more advanced techniques. Rockers, sluice boxes, even full-on hydraulic mining setups. You watch in awe as someone blasts a chunk of hillside with the water pressure, strong enough to knock over a horse. It's effective, sure, but it also turns the landscape into a muddy, treeless nightmare. Whole valleys get stripped bare in pursuit of glitter, and the river runs thick with sludge. Someone tries to pan downstream and ends up with a bowl of wet clay. They throw it, yell something about cursed earth, and storm off into the forest. Here's a grim little fringe fact. In some boom towns, people made more money selling shovels than digging gold. Shops popped up overnight, selling overpriced tools, boots, beans, and everything else a desperate prospector might need. The term mining the miners wasn't a joke. It was a business model. The smart money wasn't in gold. It was in coffee and the wheelbarrows. The town that sprung up near your camp is a perfect mess of contradictions. Saloons outnumber churches 5-1. Every third building is a supply shop, every fourth a gambling den. There's a tent where a man will tell your fortune using nothing but soot in your hand. His advice: avoid rivers. Too late. At night the place comes alive, or unravels depending on your perspective. Drunk prospectors stagger out of bars singing about gold and glory. One man tries to trade a pair of trousers for a mule that doesn't exist. Another claims to have struck a vein the size of a bread loaf, and is promptly tackled by a group of strangers hoping he'll cough up the location. Fights break out. Teeth go flying. Someone plays a sad fiddle tune under a wagon, and two people cry. No one knows why, and yet for all the chaos, there's something strangely hopeful about it. People believe in gold with the zeal of pilgrims. They dig, scratch, and shovel, not because they're greedy, but because they want out of poverty, out of obscurity, out of their current life. You meet a woman who used to be a school teacher in Ohio, and now she sells whiskey and rifles. Same clientele, really, she says, pouring you a drink. You ask yourself if it's worth it, the filth, the risk, the heartbreak. Then you see a man leap up from the riverbank with a tiny, glittering nugget in his hand. He screams like he's been shot, only louder. Everyone rushes over. There's clapping, backslapping, and then dead silence as they all realise he won't say where he found it. He disappears into the trees that night. Some say he's headed for town, others say he was followed. Historians still argue about whether the average prospector ever made a profit. Some did, few, very few. Most spent everything they had on the journey and returned home worse off. Others never returned at all. The gold rush became less about gold and more about movement, about reshaping the map, about towns that exploded overnight and collapsed just as fast. The next morning you wake up in a damp tent, your boots frozen in place, your muscles sore from another day of finding absolutely nothing. And still, you go back to the river, you squat, you swirl, you squint, and for a second, just 1 second, you think you see something shiny. It's not gold, it's just mica, the great trickster of the mining world. But your heart skips anyway. Because out here, hope doesn't die with the sun, it resets. Every dawn brings a new chance, however unlikely. And whether you're a bearded man with one boot or a city teacher turned a whiskey dealer, you keep digging. Because maybe, just maybe, this is the day it finally shines for you. You've been on this land for weeks now, scraping by, itching constantly, and learning just how many ways a person can be cold, hungry, and covered in goat hair. And somehow you still haven't stopped to ask a crucial question. Who was here before all this? Before the wagons, the cabins, the fences, and the very loud people with axes? Because this land wasn't empty. It wasn't waiting patiently for settlers to arrive. It was lived on, walked across, sung to, prayed over, and buried in for generations before a single pioneer drove a stake into the ground and called it mine. This morning you walk beyond the edge of the homesteads and trading posts, out toward the hills where the trees grow thick and the trail disappears, and there you find it, what looks like a cluster of stones arranged in a circle, half covered in moss and soil. Maybe it's a fire pit, maybe it's sacred, maybe it's both. You kneel beside it and suddenly feel very, very small. Native American tribes lived on this land long before the word frontier ever existed. For thousands of years they hunted, farmed, traded, told stories, raised children, and buried their dead here. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Apache, the Ute, the Shoshone, and countless others, each with languages, traditions, and histories deeper than any settler's claim, but the frontier story most often told leaves them out, or worse, paints them as obstacles to be removed. The great lie of manifest destiny swept across the land like a dust storm, erasing people in its path. The land was seen as wild, empty, ripe for the taking. Settlers built fences and towns. They drew maps over old hunting trails and sacred spaces, and when native people resisted, because of course they did, they were called savages. You pass a broken wooden sign half swallowed by brush. It once marked a reservation boundary, though now it's just splinters nailed to a leaning post. The reservation system was supposed to be a compromise. It was, in practice, a forced relocation. Whole tribes were marched off their homelands to unfamiliar and often uninhabitable places. Promised food and supplies that never arrived. Disease followed. So did hunger, poverty and erasure. But native resistance never disappeared. Even after broken treaties and massacres, people continued to resist in quiet, powerful ways, by speaking their language, teaching their children, keeping ceremonies alive, even when outlawed. You meet an old man named Two Stones, whose grandparents were forced onto a reservation. He's whittling a piece of bone into a shape that resembles a bird. He doesn't speak much English, he doesn't have to. The fire in his eyes says enough. Fringe fact, some settlers who lived near native tribes learned their languages and customs, sometimes even married into those communities. Others adopted their farming methods and healing practices, only to pretend later they'd come up with them on their own. Cultural borrowing on the frontier was often one way. Teach us how to survive, and then step aside. You attend a small gathering near the river, where a few families from a nearby tribe hold what they quietly call a story fire. It's not public, not announced, just something they do because it needs doing. One man tells a story about the coyote trickster. A woman sings a lullaby in a voice so soft you lean forward instinctively. The children listen with wide eyes. So do the adults. Because stories are more than entertainment here. They're memory, resistance, a way to say we are still here. Scholars continue to argue over how much settlers knew or cared about the cultures they were displacing. Some accounts show moments of compassion, cooperation, even a friendship. Others are filled with horrifying violence, greed, and self-justification. The truth is as layered as the land itself. Not everyone was a villain, not everyone was a hero, but the damage was real, the displacement was real, and the scars are still there, hidden under layers of grass and gravel. You return to town with that weight in your chest, the knowledge that this place, this rough little settlement with its outhouses and goat-stinking romance, is built on top of someone else's story. And that story didn't end when yours began. You pass by a shop that sells Indian curios, beaded trinkets and feathers arranged like souvenirs. You feel your jaw clench. That night, you sit by your fire and stare into the flames. You wonder how many fires were lit here before yours. How many songs were sung in languages you'll never understand. You realize how new you are, how temporary, and how easily your own story could be forgotten if someone decided to build over it one day. You take out your journal and write, slowly, awkwardly, about the man with the bird carving, about the circle of stones, about the story fire. You write it not because you think you can fix anything or even explain it fully, but because forgetting feels like another kind of theft. And the least you can do is remember. It's Sunday again, or what passes for Sunday, and you're being dragged by a neighbour with enthusiastic hands and suspicious breath toward a patch of grass that has been cleared of livestock just long enough to make space for a revival tent. The structure looks more like a wind-struck bedsheet stapled to a dozen mismatched poles, and there's already a crowd gathering, buzzing with the same kind of nervous energy you'd expect from people about to bet their farm on a card game. Except this isn't cards, it's salvation. Or maybe both. The tent smells like sawdust, sweat, and something vaguely medicinal. Possibly menthol. Possibly someone's foot balm. You slide onto a wooden bench with splinters in all the wrong places and glance around. Kids squirm in itchy clothes. Women fan themselves with whatever they have handy. Men stand near the entrance, arms crossed, ready to bolt at the first sign of excessive emotion. You have no idea what to expect, but someone hands you a piece of hard candy and says, "It helps when they start yelling." You pocket it just in case. The preacher arrives in a cloud of dust, righteous fury and cologne. He's got a voice that could sand a fence post and a way of pacing the stage like he's trying to chase down the devil himself. Within minutes, he's shouting about fire, brimstone, and the dangers of card-playing, dancing, alcohol, and girls named Daisy. You're not sure what Daisy did, but you hope she's okay. This is a revival. A spiritual tent meeting meant to reignite faith in the hearts of weary settlers. And it's loud. Very loud. The preacher's voice rises and falls like a thunderstorm backed by the off-key clatter of a pump organ that sounds like it's being exercised in real time. People shout "Amen" at random. Someone claps, someone else faints. A woman next to you is crying into a handkerchief shaped like a duck. You quickly realise this is more than just a religious gathering. It's therapy, theatre, and community all wrapped in a sweaty tent. People are here to purge something: guilt, grief, boredom, probably whatever that meat was last night. And the preacher, sensing his moment, goes in harder. He calls for sinners to rise. People stand, some fall back down, a child starts screaming, "I see the light!" But it turns out he's just staring at the sun through a hole in the roof. And then come the testimonials. One by one, folks get up and tell stories about what they've been saved from: drinking, swearing, gambling, pride, staring too long at someone else's mule. One man confesses he used to cheat at checkers until the Lord put a knot in his back so bad he couldn't sit straight. You nod solemnly. Frontier repentance, it seems, is extremely creative. What strikes you, though, is the sincerity. Behind the noise and theatrical flair, these people believe. They believe in grace, in judgment, in redemption. They believe someone, somewhere, is watching. And that belief gets them through sickness, hunger, floods, and funerals. It keeps their hands steady and their boots moving forward even when everything else feels like it's falling apart. Religion out here is as wild as the land itself. There's no single denomination, no grand cathedral. Faith is stitched together from travelling preachers, dog-eared Bibles, and whatever interpretation makes sense that day. One week it's fire and brimstone, the next it's healing and hugs. It changes based on who's yelling loudest and how many people are listening. Fringe fact. Snake handling was a very real, if rare, form of worship that appeared in some frontier sects, based on a literal reading of scripture and a frankly terrifying level of trust in divine protection. You ask if this revival has snakes. A woman nearby leans in and says, "Not this week." You choose to sit very still. Scholars still debate how much of frontier faith was rooted in genuine spiritual hunger versus sheer desperation. Did people believe because they felt the divine, or because they needed something, anything, to make sense of all the suffering? Probably both, probably neither. Maybe the line doesn't matter as much when your corn crop has failed for the third year and your neighbours are dying from a cough no one can explain. As the revival nears its peak, the preacher starts laying hands on people. Some sway, some fall. One man starts laughing uncontrollably and says he feels the joy of the Lord in his ankles. You try not to look confused. You reach into your pocket and unwrap the hard candy. It tastes like cloves and are regrets, but it does take your mind off the shouting. The service ends with a hymn so loud it physically moves the tent. Everyone sings, everyone claps, even the kids get into it. And as the final amen rings out, there's this strange, vibrating silence that follows, like the dust is still settling. People step outside, blinking like they've just come out of a dream. Outside, the preacher stands near a crate, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief soaked through with sweat and salvation. People thank him, hug him, press coins into his hand. One woman gives him a pie, another hands him a note and blushes. He smiles with practiced humility and promises to return in 2 weeks, weather permitting, of course. As the crowd disperses, you notice something else. People look lighter, calmer. Maybe nothing's changed. Maybe everything has. But for now, they've confessed, sung, cried, and shouted. They've shared something. And in a place where survival is so often a lonely, silent struggle, that kind of releases its own miracle. You return to your bunk, ears still ringing, throat sore from belting out verses you didn't know you knew. And you realise that faith on the frontier isn't tidy or polite. It's raw, messy, full of contradictions and muddy boots. But it gives people something to hold on to when everything else feels like it's slipping through their fingers. And maybe, just maybe, that's holy enough. There's an election coming up. Not that you'd know it by looking around. There are no campaign posters, no televised debates, no yard signs with the patriotic fonts. What you do have is a man shouting on top of a barrel behind the general store, waving a bottle of whiskey like a torch and declaring that he alone will fix the mud problem on Main Street. 3 people cheer, 1 person boos, a chicken walks by and is accidentally registered to vote. Welcome to frontier politics, equal parts chaos, charisma, and flat-out bribery. Elections out here are less about policy and more about personality. You don't get elected because you have a vision. You get elected because you bring good corn liquor to the polling station and can string together 3 sentences without passing out. Bonus points if you haven't stolen to anything recently. You follow the crowd toward the makeshift polling site, a room that's usually a feed store but now contains 2 rickety tables, a spittoon that has clearly seen too much, and a man with ink-stained fingers swearing under his breath as he tries to spell constable for the 4th time. Ballots are cast by voice, by scratch marks, or by whatever method the town has agreed upon that particular year. Sometimes it's pebbles in a jar, sometimes it's coloured beans, today it's folded paper dropped into an old coffee tin. Democracy at its most caffeinated. The candidates are already outside doing what they do best, talking loudly and offering bribes thinly disguised as neighbourly gestures. One man is handing out fried biscuits. Another has a barrel of hard cider with a sign that reads "Vote Smart, Drink Free." People laugh, clap him on the back, and absolutely take the cider. Whether or not they vote for him depends on how strong the brew is. This isn't new. On the frontier, politics has always walked a crooked line between earnest civic duty and who's the best at throwing a party. There's a deep scepticism of centralised authority, and most people only vote when the issue hits close to home, like fencing laws, whiskey taxes, or whether the town should invest in a second outhouse. National elections feel like a far-off dream whispered from horseback. Local ones, though, that's where things get personal. You overhear 2 men arguing over a candidate's moral integrity. One insists he once saw the man cheat at horseshoes. The other says he gave his sister a ham when her roof blew off, so clearly he's a good person. A third person chimes in that he owes the candidate 3 celts and hopes if he wins, the debt gets spiritually forgiven. No one is quite sure how that would work, but everyone nods in agreement. Here's a fringe frontier fact. In many towns, voting rights were theoretically extended to all male citizens, but in practice that often included men who were dead, missing, or never actually existed. Election rolls were sometimes padded with colourful aliases, like Hank McWhiskers or Jim the Mule. You ask the local vote counter about this. He stares at you deadpan and says, "If a man can hold a pencil, he can have an opinion." Women, of course, don't vote. Not officially. But you'd be a fool to think they're not involved. They influence their husbands, their sons, their neighbours. They whisper advice behind closed doors. Some even write speeches for the men too drunk to string sentences together. In a few radical towns, women have staged mock elections, or held their own meetings to practice debating issues. One woman tells you she hosts sewing circles that are 10% embroidery, 90% strategy. You nod. You are not surprised. As the day rolls on, the political speeches begin. You sit on a barrel as one candidate declares his undying hatred for fences. "They divide us!" he cries. "Literally!" The next promises to fix the town's water pump, though he doesn't say how. The last man, who seems to have wandered in from another town, tells a confusing story about a dream involving Abraham Lincoln and a haunted pie. Somehow, he gets the most applause. Voting begins in earnest and the line moves slowly. Some folks are suspicious of the process, muttering about rigged tins and ballot jiggling. One man insists on inspecting every ballot with a lantern. Another demands to vote twice because he's double mad this year. The election judge, a man named Elwood with a peg leg and an eye patch, lets it slide. "Just don't tell anyone," he says loudly. Scholars argue whether frontier politics was dangerously informal or delightfully democratic. Some claim the lack of structure encouraged corruption and favouritism. Others point out that these small-scale, face-to-face elections were more honest than anything conducted hundreds of miles away by people in powdered wigs. Out here, you know your candidates. You've seen them build barns, break noses, and accidentally set their pants on fire. Their records are public, whether they like it or not. By sundown, the votes are tallied, and a winner is declared. He celebrates by buying everyone another round of cider and giving a victory speech that starts with, "Well, that was unexpected." He promises to listen to the people, fix the pump, lower taxes, and maybe organise a town picnic if the cows cooperate. Everyone cheers, someone plays a harmonica, and the defeated candidates shake hands, grumble something about next time, and wander off to resume being mediocre at something else. You walk home under a sky full of stars, thinking about how bizarre and oddly beautiful frontier politics really is. It's messy, loud, deeply biased, and often ridiculous. But it works, kind of, sometimes, in its own wild way. These aren't polished leaders reading off teleprompters. They're flawed, scrappy survivors with mud on their boots and smoke in their lungs. And somehow, their choices shape the future of the town, one cider-soaked ballot at a time. You tuck your folded paper deeper into your pocket and decide maybe you'll run next year. After all, you've got opinions, a decent chili recipe, and at least one clean shirt. And on the frontier, that's practically a campaign platform. The noose is already tied. That's the first thing you notice. It's hanging from the thickest branch of an old cottonwood just outside town, swaying in the wind like a grim decoration. No trial has been held yet, at least not a proper one, but the crowd is gathering. People whisper and shift uncomfortably, but no one walks away. That's how frontier justice works. Fast, messy, and in full view of everyone with eyes. The accused is the thin man in his 20s, shirt torn, nose blooded, and eyes wide with disbelief. He's tied to a post guarded by a farmer with a shotgun and a 6-year-old boy throwing pebbles at his boots. The man swears he didn't do it, didn't even own a red bandana, whatever that means, but his words are being drowned out by the murmurs of a community that's already made up its mind. Word around town is that someone robbed the feed store last night. Took some money, a few sacks of flour and a pair of boots, red bandana found near the back door. That's all it took. No one saw the thief, no one followed any tracks, but a stranger rolled into town around the same time, and he had calluses on his hands and no explanation for where he'd been. So here we are. Frontier justice is not about evidence. It's about timing, proximity, and how much people already distrust you. If you look out of place, smell funny, or say the wrong thing to the wrong person, you could find yourself on the wrong end of a rope by sundown. And if the town's had a bad week, lost a few cows, a child got sick, someone's barn caught fire, you can bet they'll be hungry for something that looks like justice, even if it's just vengeance in a cheap coat. You overhear someone say, "We can't let this slide. People will think they can just take what they want." Another adds, "If we don't act, who will?" That's the common refrain out here. Who will? Because the sheriff is 2 towns away, the judge hasn't ridden through in months, and the law books, if they even exist, are being used to prop up the saloon table. So the community becomes the judge, jury, and, if it comes to it, executioner. You watch as an impromptu hearing begins. The accuser, a portly man with a nose like a tomato and a voice like an angry mule, says he saw someone about that size sneaking near the store after dark. He can't be sure, of course, but he's got a feeling. Another man claims the accused looked shifty. A third remembers seeing him spit on the ground, which in his mind says everything. The accused tries to speak. He says his name is Daniel. He says he's looking for work. He says he slept in a barn outside of town and only came in this morning to buy coffee. He holds up a silver coin and shakes his head. "I didn't steal nothing," he says. "I've been walking for days." No one listens, or rather, they listen just enough to become more convinced he's lying. Fringe fact, some frontier towns kept a designated hanging tree, often a large oak or cottonwood near the edge of town. It became part of the landscape, part of the unspoken law. Kids knew to stay away from it. Adults knew to avoid being near it when tensions were high. And when someone was tied to it, guilty or not, very few ever walked away. Someone hands the farmer a folded piece of paper that says guilty, in crude handwriting. That's it. No signatures, no seal, no official anything, just a note that seals a man's fate. The farmer nods grimly and unties Daniel from the post. The crowd closes in, not jeering exactly, but not stopping it either. You look around, hoping someone will shout wait or think, or what if we're wrong? But all you hear is the wind and the creak of the rope overhead. Historians often argue about these moments, how common lynchings were, how often they targeted the wrong person, and how much fear shaped community decisions. In some cases, people truly believed they were enforcing justice. In others, it was racism, hatred, or simple convenience. A scapegoat, after all, is easier to handle than an unsolved crime. Daniel is pushed forward. He stumbles, face pale, hands shaking. The rope is lowered, looped around his neck. He closes his eyes. You think he's praying, maybe you are too. And then, suddenly, a voice cuts through the crowd. It's Mrs. Ellison, the same woman whose house burned down 2 weeks ago. She steps forward with her arms crossed, eyes blazing. "You're about to hang a man for boots," she says. "If those boots show up in the wrong wagon tomorrow, do we hang the next one?" Silence. "You think this will keep us safe," she adds. "All it'll do is make us mean." Her words hang in the air longer than the rope does. No one moves. Someone coughs. A young boy starts to cry quietly, and slowly, almost reluctantly, the crowd starts to peel away, one by one, no dramatic speeches, just shame, quiet and contagious. The rope is cut. Daniel falls to the ground gasping. Someone helps him up. Mrs. Ellison, of course. The farmer lowers his shotgun and walks away, muttering something about, "Not my job anyway." The crowd disperses, and the cottonwood tree sways gently, its noose swinging empty in the wind. Later, over dinner, you try to eat, but the food tastes like sawdust. You can still see Daniel's face, still hear the creak of that rope. The worst part, no one apologised. No one asked his name again. They just moved on like they always do. And that's the thing about frontier justice. It's swift, but not always right. It's loud, but not always true. And it leaves a scar on the land, on the people, and on you. You lie in bed that night, unable to sleep, because now you know all it takes is bad luck, a bad week, and a red bandana, and you might be the one standing under that tree next time. There's a woman in town who sells apples. That's all she does. She sits on a stool outside the general store with a crate in front of her, sun-hardened hands folded neatly, and eyes that say she's seen too much to care whether you buy one or not. She doesn't smile, doesn't shout, just watches. The apples are small, uneven, and bruised in places, but somehow they're the best thing you've tasted all month. You ask her where she gets them, and she says, "I grow 'em, right over that ridge." You look up at the ridge, it's bare, just rocks and stubborn weeds. She shrugs. "That's how I like it." You think about her more than expected as winter starts to lean in. The wind bites a little sharper. The fire takes longer to catch. And every morning someone mutters something about the frost creeping closer. It's not dramatic. There's no blizzard howling across the plains yet, but you feel it in your bones. Winter's coming, and no one's ready. This is when the real work begins. Not the glory kind, the digging for gold or shooting at bandits kind, but the quite heavy kind. Chopping wood, salting meat, canning anything that used to grow. Everyone turns into a squirrel with anxiety issues. Hoarding food. Wool candles and the occasional bottle of questionable whiskey. The days grow shorter, and the to-do list longer. You help mend the roof of a neighbour's cabin to using tar that smells like regret and sticks to everything but the actual wood. Your hands go numb halfway through, but you keep working because that's what people do out here. Winter doesn't care if your fingers work. It just comes anyway. A young couple from down the trail packs up and leaves. No one says it, but you all know why. They didn't store enough. Not enough food, not enough firewood, not enough grit. You watch them disappear over the hill, wagon rattling, and hope they find a warmer patch of earth. Or a miracle. Either works. Fringe fact, many frontier families stored their root vegetables in what they called cellars, but often these were just holes dug into hillsides and covered with planks. Cold, damp, dark, and filled with spiders the size of your thumb. You check your own stash and find 2 potatoes, 3 onions, and something you really hope is a squash. Congratulations, you're officially underprepared. The livestock get quieter. The chickens fluff up like sad little clouds and stop laying eggs. The cows give milk, but only if you bribe them with the last of the corn mash. Even the goats look nervous. One stares at you too long, you stare back. He wins. Food becomes a negotiation. You trade with neighbours, beans for salt, lard for dried peaches, 2 skeins of wool for 1 precious jar of molasses. It's not a barter system, it's a slow-motion panic with a polite smile. You hear stories of people further out selling their shoes for butter. Someone once traded a shovel for a single biscuit. That's how tight it gets. You visit the apple woman again. Her crate is half empty now. She doesn't say anything, just nods when you point to the smallest one. You offer her a tin cup of honey in return, and for the first time, she actually looks you in the eye. "That'll do," she says. You wonder if she likes the honey or if she's just glad someone tried to be fair. Scholars often portray frontier winters as tests of endurance, which is technically accurate, but that doesn't quite capture it. It's not just about physical survival. It's the boredom. The slow unravelling of time, days where you wake, eat, sit, stare and sleep, over and over. Cabin fever isn't just a phrase out here. It's a slow erosion, a scraping of the mind by wind, silence, and the sound of your own chewing. You share your cabin with 2 others now, space is heat after all, and try to ignore the way they chew too loudly or snore like haunted bears. You all take turns reading the same 2 books, making up new endings just to keep it interesting. One night, someone tries to teach the goat how to play checkers. The goat is not interested. The cold deepens, your breath turns visible, your skin cracks, the soup gets thinner each night, but still people laugh quietly around fires bundled in everything they own. One woman starts carving tiny animals out of candle wax and gives them to children. A man starts a rumour about a wandering peddler who's part bear just to see who believes it. Spoiler, everyone. You learn that warmth isn't just fire, it's stories, shared jokes. Someone slipping you the last crust of cornbread. A stranger leaving a bundle of kindling on your porch without saying a word. You survive winter not just with heat, but with kindness rationed just as carefully as flour. One night, the wind howls like it's lost something. You huddle near the stove, listening to the creaks and groans of wood and weather, and wonder how much more it can take, and how much more you can take. But then morning comes, like it always does. Pale light, brittle frost, and a sky so clear it makes your eyes ache. You step outside, stretch your aching back, and see the apple woman standing near her ridge, cloak pulled tight, staring into the horizon. She doesn't move, doesn't wave, just stands there like a monument to endurance. You don't know her story, don't know how she came to be here, but you know she'll make it. Somehow you think you will too, because that's the secret the frontier never tells you. Until you're knee-deep in snow and out of tea, surviving isn't dramatic. It's not about heroics. It's quiet, relentless, one breath at a time. One splintered log at a time, one apple, bruised and small, passed between hands. You make it through the worst of the winter, and by some small miracle, or sheer spite, you're still alive. The frost loosens its grip. The mornings arrive a little earlier, and your boots no longer freeze to the floorboards overnight. It's not warm, not yet, but the wind feels less like a punishment and more like a warning that better days are coming. And with the first muddy thaw of spring comes something else, the unmistakable urge to leave. It starts as a thought you don't say out loud. A quiet itch behind your eyes. You're chopping wood or patching the roof and suddenly wondering what lies past the next hill. A new town, a better claim, maybe a place where the goats don't glare at you like they know what you did last night. You start noticing things, the rot in the beams, the way the cabin creaks like it's sick of you, the dullness in the faces of people who've seen too many winters in one spot. Even your shadow looks tired. Then you hear about it. A new opportunity. A wagon train heading west to Oregon. A land agent in town swearing there's good soil and clear water just waiting for the right hands. You see posters for new claims, new towns, places with names like Prosper or Eden or Fort something or other. Promises scrawled in bad handwriting and soaked in sunshine dreams. And just like that, the whole settlement starts to stir again. Not with planting or building, but with packing. You watch it happen in real time. Families that swore they'd never move again, suddenly trading wagons for flour and barrels of salt pork. The blacksmith hammers out wheels instead of horseshoes. The apple woman disappears without a word one morning, her crate left behind with a single perfect apple still inside. Someone steals it. You don't blame them. Leaving becomes a kind of fever. Every conversation turns into a plan. Who's got oxen? Who needs a new axle? Who heard the trail is easier this year, drier, safer? Spoiler. It's not. But people believe because they have to. Belief is half of what carries you on the trail. The other half is sheer, boot-stomping stubbornness. You visit a friend who's already halfway packed. His cabin looks like a skeleton stripped bare. "You going?" he asks. You shrug. He nods like he understands. He doesn't. Not really. You don't even know if you do. Frontier life, for all its roots and rituals, is not built to stand still. It's made of motion, risk, and the endless, exhausting pursuit of maybe better. The promise that somewhere beyond the next range of hills lies the version of your life where things finally go right. Where the crops grow high, the roof doesn't leak, and you don't get boils from drinking the water, Wheeler. You probably still will. There's a name for this. Historians call it mobility culture. The tendency of frontier settlers to keep moving west, again and again, chasing land, weather, opportunity, or just the chance to start over. They weren't wanderers, they were resetters. They didn't crave the unknown, they craved the next chance to get it right. Sometimes they did, often they didn't, but the movement was the point. You walk out past the edge of town one last time, the grass is waking up. Tiny shoots pushing through the mud like they've got something to prove. You pass old wheel ruts that haven't faded yet. The memory of travellers who came, stayed, left, and were forgotten. You wonder if the town will remember you when you go. You wonder if you want it to. A boy rides by on a pony too small for his legs, shouting that the train leaves at dawn. You nod. You're not sure if he's talking to you or to himself or to everyone, but the message sticks. That night you sit by the fire and pack what little you have. You leave behind the heavy stuff, the broken tools, the books with pages missing, the guilt. You take the knife that's always in your boot, the letters you never sent, and the apple crate the old woman left behind. You fill it with jerky and hope, tie it shut with a twine, and in the silence before sleep, you realise the filth, the misery, the freezing nights and burning days, all of it didn't beat you. It didn't make you coughed, it made you ready. Not strong, not brave, just ready. Because that's what the frontier does. It strips you down, shaves off all the things you thought mattered, and leaves you with only what will carry. The road west won't be easier. You'll still get blisters, you'll still bury things you love, you'll still have to share a wagon with someone who snores like a freight train and thinks bathing is unnecessary. But you'll go anyway, because maybe, just maybe, this time the cabin won't burn, the well won't go dry, and the goats will like you. As dawn creeps up behind the hills, you shoulder your bag, step into the ruts left by 1,000 others, and take your first step away, not because you hated it here, but because the story isn't over yet.